Chapter 11. The charcoal kiln in Pinetops was close to a logging site, as the charcoal burners used woody debris left over after felling. The burning had begun a short time before, and foul-smelling, yellowish smoke was streaming from the top of the dome, as though from a volcano's crater. The smell couldn't mask the odour of death hanging over the clearing. Geralt dismounted and drew his sword. He saw the first corpse, without head or feet, just beside the charcoal kiln, blood spurting over the soil covering the mound. Not far away lay 3 more bodies, unrecognisably mutilated. Blood had soaked into the absorbent forest sand, leaving darkening patches. 2 more cadavers, those of a man and a woman, were lying nearer to the centre of the clearing, and the campfire encircled by stones. The man's throat had been torn out so savagely his cervical vertebrae were visible. The upper part of the woman's body was lying in the embers of the fire, smeared in groats from an upturned cooking pot. A little further away by a woodpile lay a child, a little boy of perhaps 5 years old. He had been rent in 2. Somebody, or rather something, had seized him by both legs and torn them apart. Geralt saw another body. This one had been disemboweled and its guts pulled out. To their full length, or about 2 yards of the large bowel and over 6 of the small. The guts were stretched in a straight, shiny, greyish-pink line, all the way to a shack of pine branches into which they vanished. Inside the shelter, a slim man was lying on his back on a primitive pallet. It was clear at once that he was quite out of place there. His ornate clothing was completely covered in blood, soaked through. But the Witcher noticed it wasn't squirting, gushing or dripping from any of the main blood vessels. Geralt recognised him, despite his face being covered in drying blood. It was that long-haired, slim, somewhat effeminate fop, Sorrel Dagerlund, introduced to him during the audience with Ortolan. At that time, he had also been wearing the same braided cloak and embroidered doublet as the other sorcerers, had been sitting among them, and, like the others, had been observing the Witcher with barely concealed aversion. And now he was lying unconscious, in a charcoal burner's shack, covered in blood, with a human intestine coiled around his right wrist, pulled from the belly of a corpse lying not 10 paces away. The Witcher swallowed. "Shall I hack him to death?" he thought, "while he's unconscious? Are Pinity and Zara expecting that? Shall I kill the energumen? Eliminate the goetic practitioner who amuses himself by evoking demons?" A groan shook him out of his reflections. Sorrel Dagerlund, it appeared, was coming around. He jerked his head up, moaned, and then slumped back onto the pallet. He lifted himself up, looking vacantly around him. He saw the Witcher and opened his mouth, looked at his blood-spattered stomach and raised a hand to see what he was holding, and began to scream. Geralt looked at his sword, Dandelion's purchase with the gilt crossguard. He looked at the sorcerer's thin neck, at the swollen vein on it. Sorrel Dagerlund unpeeled and stripped the intestine from his hand. He stopped screaming and just groaned, shaking. He got up, first onto his hands and knees, and then onto his feet. He lurched out of the shelter, looked about him, shrieked and made to bolt. The Witcher grabbed him by the collar, set him in one place, and pushed him down to his knees. "What has—" Dagerlund mumbled, still shaking. What happened here?" "I think you know." The sorcerer swallowed loudly. How did I end up here?" "Nothing. I don't remember anything. I don't remember anything. Nothing." "I don't actually believe you." "The invocation." Dagerlund seized his face in his hands. "I invoked it, and it appeared. In the pentagram. In the chalk circle. And entered me." "Not for the first time, I imagine, eh?" Dagerlund sobbed, somewhat theatrically, Geralt couldn't help thinking. He regretted that he hadn't surprised the energumen before the demon had abandoned him. His regret, he realized, wasn't very rational. He was aware how dangerous a confrontation with the demon could be, and he should have been glad he'd avoided it. But he wasn't glad, because at least he would have known what to do. It just had to happen to me, he thought, and not Franz Torquil and his troop. The constable wouldn't have had any qualms or scruples. Bloodied, caught with the entrails of his victim in his fist, the sorcerer would have had a noose around his neck at once and would have been dangling from the handiest bough. Neither hesitations nor doubts would have held Torquil back. It wouldn't have bothered Torquil that the effeminate and scrawny sorcerer was absolutely incapable of slaughtering so many people in such a short time that his blood-soaked clothing hasn't managed to dry out or stiffen, and wouldn't have been able to tear a child apart with his bare hands. No, Torquil wouldn't have had any qualms. But I do. Penity and Zara were sure I wouldn't.
"Don't kill me," Dagland whined. "Don't kill me, Witcher. I will never more."
Shut up.
"I swear I'll never."
Shut up! Are you conscious enough to use magic? To summon the sorcerers from Risberg here?
I have a sigil. I can teleport myself to Risberg.
Not alone. With me. And no tricks. Don't try to stand up. Stay on your knees.
I must stand up. And you, if the teleportation is to work, you must stand close to me. Very close.
Why exactly? Come on. What are you waiting for? Get that amulet out.
It's not an amulet. I said it's a sigil.
Dagland undid his blood-soaked doublet and shirt. He had a tattoo on his skinny chest, 2 overlapping circles. The circles were dotted with points of various sizes. It looked a little like the diagram of the planet's orbits that Geralt had once admired at the Academy in Oxenfurt. The sorcerer uttered a melodious spell. The circles shone blue, the points red, and began to rotate.
"Now stand close."
Close?
"Still closer. Cling to me."
What?
"Get in close and hug me."
Dagland's voice had changed. His eyes, a moment before tearful, now lit up hideously, and his lips contorted repugnantly.
"Yes, that's right. Firmly and tenderly, as though I were your Yennefer."
Geralt understood what was on the cards, but he didn't manage to push Dagland away, strike him with the pommel of his sword, or slash him across the neck with the blade. He was simply too slow. An iridescent glow flashed in Geralt's eyes. In a split second, he plunged into black nothingness, into bitter cold, silence, amorphousness, and timelessness. They landed with a thud, the stone slabs of the floor seemingly leaping up to meet them. The impact threw them apart. Geralt was unable even to look around properly. An intense stench reached his nostrils, the odour of filth mixed with musk. 2 sets of immense, mighty hands caught him under the arms and behind his head. Fat fingers closed easily over his biceps. Steely thumbs dug painfully into his nerves, into the brachial plexus. He went totally numb, and his sword slipped from his inert hand. He saw before him a hunchback with a hideous face covered in sores, his head dotted with sparse tufts of stiff hair. The hunchback, standing with his crooked legs wide apart, was pointing a large crossbow at him, or actually an arbalest with 2 steel bows, one above the other. The 2 4-cornered bolts aimed at Geralt were a good 2 inches wide and razor-sharp. Sorrel Dagland was standing in front of him.
"As you've probably realized," he said, "you haven't ended up at Risberg. You're in my asylum and lair. A place about which the people at Risberg know nothing, where I conduct experiments with my master. I am, as you probably know, Sorrel Albert Amador Dagland, Magister Magicus. I am what you don't know yet, he who will inflict pain and death on you." The feigned terror and simulated panic, all appearances, vanished as though blown away by the wind. Everything in the charcoal burner's clearing had been feigned. A quite different Sorrel Dagland was standing before Geralt as he hung in the paralysing grip of those gnarled hands. A triumphant Sorrel Dagland, bursting with arrogance and hubris. Sorrel Dagland grinning a vicious smile. A smile calling to mind centipedes squeezing through gaps under doors.
disturbed graves, white maggots squirming in carrion, fat horseflies wriggling their legs in a bowl of broth. The sorcerer came closer. He was holding a steel syringe with a long needle. "I deceived you like a child in the clearing," he hissed. "You turned out to be as naive as a child. The Witcher, Geralt of Rivia. Although his instinct didn't mislead him, he didn't kill, because he wasn't certain. For he's a good Witcher, and a good man. Shall I tell you, good Witcher, what good people are? They're people whom fate hasn't blessed with the chance of profiting from the benefits of being evil. Or, alternatively, people who were given a chance, but were too stupid to take advantage of it. It doesn't matter which group you belong to. You let yourself be tricked. You fell into a trap, and I guarantee that you won't get out of it alive." He lifted the syringe. Geralt felt a prick, and immediately acute pain. A stabbing pain that darkened his eyes, tensed his entire body. A pain so dreadful that only the greatest effort stopped him from screaming. His heart began to beat frantically, and compared to his usual pulse, 4 times slower than that of a normal person, it was an extremely unpleasant sensation. Everything went black. The world spun around, blurred and dissolved. He was dragged away in the glow of magical balls dancing over the bare walls and ceilings. One of the walls he passed was covered in patches of blood and was hung with weapons. He saw broad curved scimitars, huge sickles, gizarm, battle-axes and morning stars. They were all streaked with blood. They were used in yew trees, arches and Rogovishna, he thought lucidly. They were used to massacre the charcoal burners in pine tops. He had gone quite numb, had stopped feeling anything. He couldn't even feel the crushing grip of the hands holding him. He didn't realize at once that what he could hear was merry chuckling. Whoever was dragging him was clearly enjoying the situation. The hunchback walking in front with a crossbow was whistling. Geralt had almost lost consciousness. He was shoved down roughly into an upright chair. He could finally see who was dragging him, crushing his armpits with their huge hands. He remembered the giant ogre dwarf Mikita, Pyrrell Pratt's bodyguard. These two resembled him a little. They could just about have passed for close relatives. They were of similar height to Mikita, reeked similarly. Like him, had no neck, and like him, their teeth protruded from their lower lips like wild boar's tusks. Mikita was bald and bearded, however, while these two didn't have beards. Their simian faces were covered in bristles, and the tops of their egg-shaped heads were adorned with something like tousled oakum. Their eyes were small and bloodshot, their ears large, pointed, and horribly hairy. Their garb bore streaks of blood, and their breath stank as though they'd eaten nothing but garlic, shit, and dead fish for many days. Boo, bang, enough laughter. Get to work, both of you. Get out, Pastor, but stay close. The two giants went out, their great feet slapping. The hunchback, addressed as Pastor, hurried after them. Sorrel Dagerland appeared in the Witcher's field of view. Scrubbed, hair combed, in fresh clothes and looking effeminate. He slid a chair closer, sat down, with a table piled with weighty tomes and grimoires behind him. He looked at the Witcher, grinning malevolently. At the same time, he was playing with and swinging a medallion on a gold chain, which he was winding around a finger. "I treated you to extract of white scorpion's venom," he said detachedly. "Nasty, isn't it? Can't move a hand, a leg, not even a finger. Can't wink, or even swallow. But that's nothing. Uncontrollable movements of your eyeballs and disturbances to your sight will soon follow. Then you'll feel cramps, really powerful cramps. They'll probably strain your intercostal muscles. You won't be able to control the grinding of your teeth. You're certain to break a few. The excessive salivation will occur, and, finally, breathing difficulties. If I don't give you the antidote, you'll suffocate. But don't worry. I shall. You'll live. For now.
But I think you'll soon regret that you've survived. I'll explain what it's all about. We have time. But first, I'd like to watch you turning blue. I was observing you on the last day of June, during the audience, he continued a moment later. You flaunted your arrogance before us. Before us. People 100-fold your betters. People you're no match for. Playing with fire amused and excited you. I saw that. It was then that I determined to prove to you that playing with fire will get you burned, and interfering in matters of magic and mages has equally painful consequences. You'll soon find out for yourself. Geralt tried to move, but couldn't. His limbs and entire body were paralyzed and insensitive. He felt an unpleasant tingling in his fingers and toes. His face was completely numb, and his lips felt like they were laced together. His vision was deteriorating. His eyes were misting over, and a cloudy mucus was gluing them together. Dandelion crossed his legs and swung the medallion. There was a symbol on it, an emblem in blue enamel. Geralt didn't recognize it. His eyesight was getting worse. The sorcerer hadn't lied. The disturbance to his sight was intensifying. The thing is, you see, that I plan to go far in the sorcerer's hierarchy, Dandelion continued casually. In my designs and plans, I'm relying on Ortolan, who's known to you from your visit to Risberg and the memorable audience. Geralt had the sensation that his tongue was swelling and filling his entire mouth. He was afraid it wasn't just a sensation. The venom of the white scorpion was lethal. He'd never previously been exposed to its action, and didn't know how it might affect his witch's body. He was seriously worried, desperately fighting the toxin that was destroying him. The situation didn't look good. It appeared he couldn't expect help from anywhere. A few years ago, said Sorrel Dandelion, still delighting in the sound of his own voice, I became Ortolan's assistant. The chapter assigned me to the post, and the Risberg research team approved it. I was, like my predecessors, to spy on Ortolan and sabotage his more dangerous ideas. I didn't owe my assignment merely to my magical talent, but also to my looks and personal charm, for the chapter would supply the old man with a kind of assistance he was fond of. You may not know, but during the times of Ortolan's youth, misogyny and the fashion for male friendship, which very often tended to something more, or even something much more, were rife among sorcerers. Thus it happened that a young pupil or novice didn't have a choice, had to be obedient to his seniors in this regard, as with all others. Some of them didn't like it very much, but had to take it as it came, and some acquired a liking for it. As you've probably guessed, Ortolan belonged to the latter. The boy, whose avian nickname fitted him then, became, after the experiences with his preceptor, a lifelong enthusiast and champion of noble male friendship and love, as poets would have it. It would be defined in prose more bluntly and crudely, as you know. A large black cat, with its tail fluffed up like a brush and purring loudly, rubbed itself against the sorcerer's calf. Dandelion leaned over, stroked it, and swung the medallion in front of it. The cat swatted the medallion casually with its paw. It turned away, signalling that the game was boring it, and set about licking the fur on its chest. As you've doubtless observed, continued the sorcerer, I have exceptional looks, and women have been known to call me an Ethebe. I'm fond of women, indeed, but in principle I didn't, and don't, have anything against homosexuality. Under one condition. If it is to be, it must help me to advance my career. My physical intimacy with Ortolan didn't demand excessive sacrifices. The old man had long passed both the age limit for capability and desire. But I did my best for people to think otherwise, and believe he'd utterly fallen for me. Believe there was nothing he would refuse his gorgeous lover. Believe that I knew his codes, that I had access to his secret books and notes, that he was giving me artifacts and talismans he hadn't previously revealed to anyone, and that he was teaching me forbidden spells, including Goetia. And if previously the great men and women of Risberg had disdained me, now they suddenly began to esteem me. I had grown in their eyes. They believed I was doing what they themselves dreamed of, and that I was achieving success. Do you know what transhumanism is? What kind of specialization it is? Radiation? Speciation? Introgression? No? There's nothing to be ashamed of. I don't really either. But everybody thinks I know a great deal. That under the tutelage and auspices of Ortolan, I'm conducting research into perfecting the human race, with the lofty goal of refining and improving it, to improve the human condition, to eliminate illness and disability, to banish the aging process, blah, blah, blah. For that is the goal and task of magic, to follow the path of the great masters, Malaspina, Alzor, and Idaran, the masters of hybridization, mutation, and genetic modification. Announcing its arrival by meowing, the black cat appeared again. It jumped into the sorcerer's lap, stretched and purred. Daggerland stroked it rhythmically. The cat purred even louder, extending claws of truly tiger-like proportions. You surely know what hybridization is, for it's another word for cross-breeding. The process of obtaining crossbreeds, hybrids, bastards, it's all the same. They actively experiment with that at Rissberg. They've produced endless peculiarities, monsters and sports. Some find wide practical applications, like, for example, parazugals, cleaning municipal dust heaps, para-woodpeckers, keeping down tree parasites, and mutated gambeses, feeding on the larvae of malarial mosquitoes. Or vigilosaurs, guard lizards, the killing of which you bragged about during the audience. But they consider them trifles, byproducts. What really interests them is the hybridization and mutation of people and humanoids. That is forbidden, but Rissberg disregards prohibitions. And the chapter turns a blind eye to it. Or, which is more likely, it remains immersed in blissful, dull ignorance. Malaspina, Alzor, and Idaran, it has been proved, took small, ordinary creatures to their workshops to create giants from them, like those centipedes, spiders, koshkis, and the devils know what else. What, then, they asked, stands in the way of taking an ordinary little man and transforming him into a titan, into something stronger, able to work 20 hours a day, who's unaffected by illness, who can live fully fit to 100? It's known that they wanted to do it. Apparently, they managed to. Apparently, they were successful. But they took the secret of their hybrids to the grave. Even Ortolan, who has devoted his life to studying their works, has achieved little. Boo and Bang, who dragged you here, have you observed them? They're hybrids, magical crosses of ogres and trolls. The marksman Pastor? No, in fact he is, so to speak, in the likeness and image, the completely natural result of a cross between a hideous woman and an ugly man. But Boo and Bang, they came straight out of Ortolan's test tubes. You may ask, why the hell would anyone want such hideous creatures? What the hell would you create something like that for? I didn't know that myself until quite recently, until I saw how they ripped the woodcutters and charcoal burners apart. Boo is capable of wresting someone's head from their shoulders with one tug, and Bang can tear a child apart like a roast chicken. And if you give them some sharp tools, then they can achieve a rip-roaring bloodbath. When you ask Ortolan, he says that hybridization is meant to be a way of eliminating hereditary illnesses and witters on about increasing immunity to infectious diseases, or some such old fogey's nonsense. I know better, and you do too. Specimens like Boo and Bang, and the thing you tore Idaran's plate off, are only fit for one thing: killing. And that's good, because what I needed were killing tools. I wasn't certain about my own skills and capabilities in that regard. Unjustly, as a matter of fact, as it later transpired. But the sorcerers of Rissberg go on cross-breeding, mutating, and genetically modifying from dawn to dusk. And they've had numerous successes. They've produced so many hybrids it takes your breath away. They think all of them are useful, meant to make people's lives easier and more pleasant. Indeed, they're one step away from creating a woman with a perfectly flat back, so you can fuck her from behind and have somewhere to put a glass of champagne and play solitaire at the same time. But let's return ad rem. That is, to my scientific career. Not having any tangible successes to boast of, I had to create semblances of those successes. It was easy. Do you know that other worlds, different from ours, exist, which the conjunction of the spheres cut off access to? Universes called elemental and para-elemental planes, inhabited by creatures called demons? The accomplishments of Alzur et consortes were excused by saying they had gained access to those planes and creatures, that they'd managed to invoke and tame such creatures, that they'd wrested from them and gained possession of their secrets and knowledge. I think that's all nonsense and fabrication, but everybody believes it. And what can one do when faith is so strong? In order for people to believe I was close to discovering the secrets of the old masters, I had to convince Rissberg that I know how to invoke demons. Ortolan, who'd once successfully carried out Goetia, didn't want to teach me that art. He had an insultingly low opinion of my magical abilities, and made me remember where my place was. Why? For the good of my career? I'll remember that. They'll see. The black cat, weary of being stroked, hopped off the sorcerer's lap. He swept a cold glance of his golden, wide-open eyes over the Witcher, and walked away, tail held aloft. Geralt was having more and more difficulty breathing and felt shivers shooting through his body, which he couldn't control at all. The situation looked grave, and only two circumstances augured well, giving him reason to hope. Firstly, he was still alive, and where there's life there's hope, as his preceptor in Caer Morhen, Vesemir, used to say. The second circumstance that augured well was Dagolan's swollen ego and conceitedness. It seemed the sorcerer had fallen in love with his own words as a young man, and they were clearly the love of his life. Unable thus to become a Goetic practitioner, the sorcerer went on, twisting the medallion and endlessly delighting in his own voice, I had to pretend to be one. Pretend! It's known that a demon invoked by a Goetic practitioner often breaks free and wreaks destruction. So I did just that. Several times. I slaughtered several settlements, and they believed it was a demon. You'd be astonished how gullible they are. I once decapitated a peasant I had caught and sewed the head of a large goat onto his neck using biodegradable catgut, disguising the stitches with plaster and paint. After that I displayed it to my learned colleagues as a Baphomet, the result of an extremely difficult experiment in the field of creating humans with animal heads. Only a partly successful one, because the end result didn't survive. They believed me. Just imagine. I rose even higher in their esteem. They're still waiting for me to create something that will survive. I confirm their belief in this by constantly sewing some head or other onto a decapitated corpse. But that was a digression. Where was I? Ah, the massacred settlements. As I expected, the masters of Rissberg took them as acts of demons or energumens, possessed by them. But I made a mistake. I went too far. No one would have bothered with one settlement of woodcutters, but we slaughtered several. Bew and Bang did most of the work, but I also contributed as much as I could. In the first colony, yew trees, or some such, I didn't exactly distinguish myself. When I saw what Bew and Bang were doing, I vomited, puking all over my cloak. It was only fit to be thrown away. A cloak of the best wool, trimmed with silver mink. It cost almost 100 crowns. But then I did better and better. Firstly, I attired myself suitably, like a labourer. Secondly, I grew fond of those expeditions. It turned out there can be great pleasure in chopping off somebody's legs and watching the blood spurting from the stump, or gouging out somebody's eye, or tugging a handful of steaming guts from a mutilated belly. I shall be brief. Along with today's haul, it comes to almost 210 persons of both sexes of various ages. Rissberg decided that I must be stopped. But how? They still believed in my power as a Goetic practitioner, and feared my demons, and feared infuriating Ortolan, who was enamoured of me. You were meant to be the solution. The Witcher. Geralt was breathing shallowly, and growing in optimism. His eyesight was much better, and the shivers were abating. He was immune to most known toxins, and the venom of the white scorpion, fatal to an ordinary mortal, was no exception, as it was fortunately turning out. The symptoms, which were dangerous at first, were weakening and fading with time.
and it was turning out that the witch's body was capable of neutralizing the poison quite quickly. Daggerland didn't know that, or in his conceitedness was underestimating it. I found out they planned to send you to get me. I got slightly cold feet, I don't deny it, since I'd heard this and that about witches, and about you in particular. I ran to Ortolan as quickly as I could, crying, "Save me, my beloved master!" My beloved master first told me off, and muttered something about killing woodcutters being very naughty, that it wasn't nice, and that it was to be the last time. But then he advised me how to trick you and lure you into a trap, how to capture you using a teleportational sigil that I had tattooed on my manly chest a few years ago. He forbade me, however, from killing you. Don't think that it's out of kindness. He needs your eyes. To be precise, the tapetum lucidum, the layer of tissue lining the inside of your eyeballs. A tissue that reflects and intensifies the light directed at the photoreceptor cells, thanks to which you can see at night and in the dark like a cat. Ortolan's newest idée fixe is to equip the whole of humanity with the ability to see like cats. As part of the preparations for such a lofty goal, he intends to graft your tapetum lucidum onto some other mutation he's creating, and the tissue for the implant must be taken from a live donor. Geralt cautiously moved his fingers and hand. Ortolan, an ethical and merciful mage, intends, in his boundless goodness, to spare your life after removing your eyeballs. He thinks that it's better to be blind than deceased. Furthermore, he hesitates at the thought of causing pain to your lover, Yennefer of Vengerberg, for whom he feels a great and, in his case, strange affection. On top of that, he, Ortolan, is now close to completing a magical regenerational formula. In several years, you'll be able to report to him, and he'll restore your eyesight. Are you pleased? No? And rightly. What? Do you want to say something? Please speak. Geralt pretended to be having difficulty moving his lips. Actually, he didn't have to pretend at all. Daggerland raised himself from his chair and leaned over him. I can't understand anything. He grimaced. In any case, what you have to say doesn't interest me much, whereas I, indeed, still have something to announce to you. So know that clairvoyance is among my numerous talents. I can see quite clearly that when Ortolan restores your freedom to you as a blind man, Boo and Bang will be waiting for you, and you will land up in my laboratory, definitively this time. I shall vivisect you, mainly for pleasure, although I'm also a little curious as to what's inside you. When I finish, however, I shall, to use the terminology of the abattoir, portion you up. I shall send your remains piece by piece to Risberg, as a warning of what befalls my foes. Let them see. Geralt gathered all his strength. There wasn't much of it. But where Yennefer is concerned... The sorcerer leaned over even closer. The Witcher could smell his minty breath. Unlike Ortolan, the thought of causing her suffering pleases me inordinately. Thus, I shall cut off the part that she valued most in you. I shall send it to her in Vengerberg. Geralt placed his fingers in a sign and touched the sorcerer's face. Sorrel Daggerland choked and drooped on the chair. He snorted. His eyes had sunk deep into his skull. His head lolled on his shoulder. The medallion chain slipped from his limp fingers. Geralt leapt to his feet, or rather tried to. The only thing he managed to do was to fall from the chair onto the floor, his head right in front of Daggerland's shoe. The sorcerer's medallion was in front of his nose, with a blue enamel dolphin naiant on a golden oval, the emblem of Kerak. He didn't have time either to be surprised or to think about it. Daggerland began to wheeze loudly. It was apparent he was about to awaken. The Somne sign had been effective, but faint and fleeting. The Witcher was too weakened by the effect of the venom. He stood up, holding onto the table, knocking the books and scrolls from it. Pastor burst into the room. Geralt didn't even try to use a sign. He grabbed a leather and brass-brand grimoire from the table and struck the hunchback in the throat with it. Pastor sat down heavily on the floor, dropping the arbalest. The Witcher hit him one more time, and would have repeated it, but the incunable slipped from his numb fingers. He seized a carafe standing on the books and shattered it on Pastor's forehead. The hunchback although covered in blood and red wine, didn't yield. He rushed at Geralt, not even brushing the slivers of crystal from his eyelids. "Boo!" he yelled, grabbing the Witcher by the knees. "Bang! Get to me! Get to—" Geralt seized another grimoire from the table. It was heavy, with a binding encrusted with fragments of a human skull. He slammed the hunchback with it, sending bone splinters flying in all directions. Daggerland spluttered, fighting to raise a hand. Geralt realized he was trying to cast a spell. The growing thud of heavy feet indicated that Boo and Bang were approaching. Pastor scrambled up from the floor, fumbling around, searching for the crossbow. Geralt saw his sword on the table and seized it. He staggered, almost falling over. He grasped Daggerland by the collar and pressed the blade against his throat. "Your sigil!" he screamed into his ear. "Teleport us out of here!" Boo and Bang, armed with scimitars, collided with each other in the doorway and got caught there, jammed solid. Neither of them thought of letting the other one through. The doorframe creaked. "Teleport us!" Geralt grabbed Daggerland by the hair, bending his head backwards. "Now, or I'll slit your throat!" Boo and Bang stumbled out of the doorway, taking the frame with them. Pastor found the crossbow and raised it. Daggerland opened his shirt with trembling hand and shrieked out a spell. But before the darkness engulfed them, he broke free of the Witcher and pushed him away. Geralt caught him by a lace cuff and tried to pull the sorcerer towards him. But at that moment the portal was activated, and all his senses, including touch, vanished. He felt an elemental force sucking him in, jerking him and spinning him as though in a whirlpool. The cold was numbing. For a split second. One of the longer and more ghastly split seconds of his life. He thudded against the ground, on his back. He opened his eyes. Black gloom. Impenetrable darkness was all around him. "I've gone blind," he thought. "Have I lost my sight?" He hadn't. It was simply a very dark night. His tapetum lucidum, as Daggerland had eruditely named it, had started working, picking up all the light there was in those conditions. A moment later, he recognized around him the outlines of some tree trunks, bushes, or undergrowth. And above his head, when the clouds parted, he saw stars. Interlude. The following day. You had to hand it to them. The builders of Findertown knew their trade and hadn't been idle. In spite of having seen them in action several times, Shevlov watched in fascination as they assembled the pile driver again. The three connected timbers formed a tripod, at the top of which a pulley was hung. A rope was tossed over the pulley, and a heavy metal-edged block, called a ram in the builder's jargon, was fastened to it. Shouting rhythmically, the builders tugged on the line, lifting the ram right to the top of the tripod, then quickly released it. The ram fell heavily onto a post positioned in the hole, forcing it deep into the ground. It took 3, at most 4, blows of the ram for the pile to be standing securely. The builders swiftly dismantled the tripod and loaded the parts onto a wagon, during which time one of them climbed up a ladder and nailed an enamel plaque with the Redanian coat of arms, a silver eagle on a red field, to the post. Thanks to Shevlov and his free company, and also to the pile drivers and their operation, the province of Riverside, part of the kingdom of Redania, had increased in area that day, quite significantly. The foreman walked over, wiping his forehead with his cap. He was in a sweat, although he hadn't done anything, unless you count effing and blinding. Shevlov knew what the foreman would ask, because he did so each time. "Where's the next one going, Commander?" "I'll show you." Shevlov reined his horse around. "Follow me." The carters lashed the oxen, and the builders' vehicles moved sluggishly along the ridge, along ground somewhat softened by the recent storm. They soon found themselves by the next post, which was decorated with a black plaque, painted with lilies. The post was lying on the ground, having been previously rolled into the bushes. Shevlov's crew had made sure of that. "Here's our progress triumphs," thought Shevlov. "Here's our technical thought triumphs." The hand-sunk Temerian posts could be torn out and tossed down in a trice. The Redanian post, driven in by a pile driver, couldn't be pulled out of the ground so easily. He waved a hand, indicating the direction to the builders, a few furlongs south, beyond the village. The residents of the village, insofar as a handful of shacks and huts could be called a village, had already been driven onto the green by Shevlov's riders, and were scurrying around, raising dust, being pushed back by the horses. The always hot-headed Ishkairak wasn't sparing them the bullwhip. Others spurred their horses around the homesteads. Dogs barked, women wailed, and children bawled. 3 riders trotted over to Shevlov. Jan Malkin, as skinny as a rake and nicknamed Poker, Prospero Basti, better known as Sperry, and Ayak Mordu, nicknamed Frigga, on a grey mare. "They are gathered together as you ordered," said Frigga, pushing back a lynx-fur cowpack. "The entire hamlet." "Silence them." The crowd were quietened, not without the help of knouts and staves. Shevlov went closer. "What do you call this dump?" "Wood End." "Wood End again?" These peasants don't have a scrap of imagination. Lead the builders on, Sperry. Show them where they're to drive in the post, because they'll get the place wrong again. Sperry whistled, reining his horse around. Shevlov rode over to the huddled villagers. Frigga and Poker flanked him. "Dwellers of Wood End." Shevlov stood up in the stirrups. "Heed what I say. By the will and order of His Majesty, by grace here reigning, King Vizimir, I inform you that this day the land up to the border posts belongs to the kingdom of Redania, and His Majesty, King Vizimir, is your lord and monarch. You owe him honour, obedience, and levies, and you're behind with your rent and taxes. By order of the king, you are to settle your debts immediately, into this here bailiff's coffer." "How so?" yelled a man in the crowd. "What do you mean, pay? We ain't paid." "You've already fleeced us for levies." "Temeria bailiffs fleeced you, and illegally, for this is not Temeria, but Redania. Look where the posts are." "But yesterday it was still Temeria," howled one of the settlers. "How can it be? We paid as they ordered." "You have no right." "Who?" roared Shevlov. "Who said that? It is my right. I have a royal decree. We are royal troops. I said whoever wants to stay on their farm must pay the levies to the last penny. Any who resist will be banished. You paid Temeria, so you clearly think yourselves Temerians. Then scram, get over the border, but only with what you can carry, because your farms and livestock belong to Redania." "Robbery! That's robbery and plunder!" yelled a large peasant with a shock of hair, stepping forward. "And you aren't a king's man, but a brigand. You have no Ishkairak rode over and lashed the loudmouth with a bullwhip. The loudmouth fell. Others were quelled with pikestaffs. Shevlov's company knew how to cope with peasants. They had been moving the border for a week and had pacified plenty of settlements. "Someone's approaching at speed," Frigga indicated with her scourge. "Will it be fish?" "And none other." Shevlov shielded his eyes. "Have that freak taken from the wagon and hand her over. And you, take a few of the boys and ride around the place. Various odd settlers remain dotted throughout the clearings and logging sites. You need to inform them as well, to whom they're now paying rent. Should anyone offer resistance, you know what to do." Frigga smiled evilly, flashing her teeth. Shevlov sympathized with the settlers she'd be visiting, although their fate didn't bother him much. He glanced up at the sun. "We must hurry," he thought. "It'll be worth knocking down a few Temerian posts before noon, and driving in a few of ours. You, Poker, follow me. Let's ride out to meet our guests." There were 2 guests. One was wearing a straw hat, had prominent jawbones and a jutting-out chin, and his whole face was blue with several days' beard. The second was powerfully built, a veritable giant. "Fish? Sergeant?" That annoyed Shevlov. Javil Fish, not without reason, had brought up their old friendship, the times when they had served together in the regular army. Shevlov didn't like to be reminded of those days. He didn't want to be reminded about fish, about serving, about his non-commissioned officer's pay. "Free company?" Fish nodded towards the village, from where yells and crying reached them. "Busy, I see. Punitive expedition, is it? Will you be doing some burning?" "That's my business." "I won't be," he thought, with regret, because he liked burning down villages, and the company did too. But he had no orders to do so. The orders were to redraw the border and collect levies from the settlers. drive away insubordinate individuals, but not touch goods or property, for they would serve the new settlers who would be brought there, from the north, where it was crowded even on barren land. "I caught the freak and I'm holding her," he declared, "as ordered. Tied up. It wasn't easy. Had I known, I would have asked for more. But we agreed on 500, so I'm due 500. Fish nodded, and the giant rode up and gave Shevlov 2 plump purses. He had a viper curled around a dagger blade tattooed on his forearm. Shevlov knew that tattoo. A horseman from the company appeared with a captive. The freak had a sack over her head, reaching her knees, with a cord restraining her arms. Bare legs as thin as rakes protruded from the sack. "What's this?" Fish pointed at the captive. "My dear sergeant, 500 Novigradian crowns? Bit steep for a pig in a poke." "The sack comes free," replied Shevlov coldly. "Like this good advice. Don't untie her and don't look inside." "Why?" "It's risky. She bites and might cast a spell." The giant slung the captive across his saddle. The freak, until then calm, struggled, kicked and howled in the sack. It was very little use, as the sack was holding her fast. "How do I know it is what I'm paying for?" asked Fish, "and not some chance maid, like from this here village?" "Are you accusing me of lying?" "Not in the least," Fish appeased him, helped by the sight of Poker stroking the shaft of a battle-axe hanging from his saddle. "I believe you, Shevlov. I know I can count on you. I mean, we're mates, aren't we? From the good old days? I'm in a hurry, Fish. Duty calls." "Farewell, Sergeant." "I wonder," said Poker, watching them riding away. "I wonder what they want of her. That freak. You didn't ask." "I didn't," Shevlov confessed coldly, "because you don't ask about things like that." He pitied the freak a little, but he wasn't too bothered about her fate. He guessed it would be miserable. Chapter 12. A signpost stood at the crossroads, a post with planks nailed to it, indicating the 4 points of the compass. Dawn found him where he had landed, tossed out of the portal on the dew-soaked grass, in a thicket beside a swamp or small lake, teeming with birds, whose gaggling and quacking roused him from his sound and exhausting sleep. He had drunk a witch's elixir during the night. He always made sure to keep some on him, in a silver tube in a hiding-place sewn into his belt. The elixir, called golden oriole, was used as a panacea which was particularly effective against every kind of poisoning, infections, and the action of all kinds of venoms and toxins. Golden oriole had saved Geralt more often than he could remember, but drinking the elixir had never caused the effects it had that night. For an hour after drinking it, he had fought cramps and extremely powerful vomiting reflexes, aware that he couldn't let himself be sick. As a result, although he had won the battle, he fell wearily into a deep sleep, which may also have been a consequence of the combination of the scorpion's venom, the elixir, and the teleportational journey. As far as the journey was concerned, he wasn't certain what had happened, how and why the portal opened by Dandelion had spat him out here, onto the boggy wilderness. He doubted whether the sorcerer had done that deliberately. More likely it was simply a teleportational failure, something he had been afraid of for a week, something he had heard about many times and had witnessed several times, when a portal, instead of sending the traveller where they were meant to go, threw them out somewhere else in a totally unexpected place. When he came to his senses, he was holding his sword in his right hand, and in his clenched left hand he had a shred of material, which he identified in the morning light as a shirt-sleeve. The material was cut through cleanly, as though by a knife. It didn't bear the marks of blood, however, so the teleportal hadn't cut off the sorcerer's hand, but only his shirt, Geralt realized with regret. The worst portal failure Geralt had witnessed, which had forever discouraged him from teleportation, had occurred at the beginning of his Witcher career. At that time, a fashion for being transported from place to place had prevailed among the nouveau riche, wealthy lordlings and gilded youth, and some sorcerers offered such entertainment for astronomical sums. One day, the Witcher happened to have been there, A teleportation enthusiast had appeared in a portal, bisected precisely down the middle. He looked like an open double bass case. Then everything flopped out of him and poured down. Fascination with teleportals decreased perceptibly after that accident. Compared to something like that, he thought, landing on a marsh was quite simply a luxury. He still hadn't fully regained his strength, was still experiencing dizziness and nausea. But there was no time to rest. He knew that portals left tracks, and sorcerers had ways of tracking the path of the teleportal. Although, if, as he suspected, there was a flaw in the portal, tracking his flight would be virtually impossible. But in any case, remaining for too long in the proximity of the landing place wouldn't be prudent. He set off at a brisk pace to get warm and loosen up. It began with the swords, he thought, splashing through a puddle. How had Dandelion expressed it? It's a streak of bad luck and unlucky incidents. First, I lost the swords. It's barely 3 weeks later, and now I've lost my mount. Roach, who I left in Pine Tops, is sure to be eaten by wolves, presuming somebody doesn't find and steal her. The swords. The horse. What next? I dread to think. After an hour of traipsing through the marsh, he emerged onto drier ground, and after another hour happened upon a tramped-down highway, and reached the crossroads after half an hour's march along it. A signpost stood at the crossroads, a post with planks nailed to it, indicating the 4 points of the compass. They had all been shat on by birds of passage and copiously dotted by crossbow bolt holes. It appeared that every traveller felt duty-bound to shoot at the signpost. In order then to decipher the words, one had to approach quite close. The Witcher went over and decoded the directions. The plank pointing westwards, according to the position of the sun, bore the name of Chipira, and the opposite one pointed to Tegmont. The third plank indicated the way to Findetan, while the fourth, God knew where, because someone had covered the lettering in pitch. In spite of that, Geralt already more or less knew where he was. The teleport had tossed him out on the marsh created by 2 branches of the River Pontar. The southern branch, owing to its size, had even been given its own name by cartographers, and thus appeared on many maps as the Embla. The land lying between the branches, or rather the scrap of land, was called Emblonia. At least it had been once, and quite a long time ago had stopped being called anything. The kingdom of Emblonia had ceased to exist around half a century before, and there were reasons for that. In most kingdoms, duchies, and other forms of government and social communities in the lands Geralt knew, things were in order and in fairly good shape, it would be reasonable to state. Admittedly, the system faltered occasionally, but it functioned. In the vast majority of the social communities, the ruling class ruled, rather than just stealing and organizing by turns, gambling and prostitution. Only a small percentage of the social elite consisted of people who thought that hygiene was a prostitute and gonorrhea a member of the lark family. Only a small number of the labouring and farming folk were morons who lived solely for today and today's vodka, incapable of comprehending with their vestigial intellects something as incomprehensible as tomorrow and tomorrow's vodka. Most of the priests didn't corrupt minors or swindle money out of the people, but dwelt in temples, devoting themselves wholly to attempts at fathoming the insoluble mysteries of their faith. Psychopaths, freaks, oddballs and dullards kept away from politics and important positions in the government and administration, busying themselves instead with the ruination of their own personal lives. Village idiots hunkered down behind barns and didn't try to act as tribunes of the people. Thus it was in most states. But the kingdom of Emblonia wasn't part of the majority. It was a minority in all the above-mentioned respects, and in many others. Hence it fell into decline, and finally disappeared. So its powerful neighbours, Temeria and Redania, fought over it. Emblonia, though a politically inept creation, possessed certain wealth, for it lay in the alluvial valley of the River Pontar, which for centuries had deposited silt there carried by floods. Fen soil, an extremely fertile and agriculturally high-yield variety, was formed from the silt. Under the rule of Emblonia's kings, the fen soil began to turn into a swampy wasteland on which little could be grown, much less harvested. Meanwhile, Temeria and Redania were recording considerable increases in population, and agricultural production had become a matter of vital importance. Emblonia's fen soil tempted. So, the two kingdoms divided by the river Pontar carved up Emblonia between themselves without further ado, and struck its name from the map. The part annexed by Temeria was called Pontaria, and what fell to Redania became Riverside. Hordes of settlers were brought in to work the soil. Under the gaze of able stewards, and owing to judicious agriculture and drainage, the region, though small, soon became a veritable agrarian horn of plenty. Disputes also quickly sprang up, becoming more heated the more abundant became the harvests yielded by the Pontarian fen soil. The treaty demarcating the border between Temeria and Redania contained clauses permitting all sorts of interpretations, and the maps appended to the treaty were useless because the cartographers botched their work. The river itself also played a part. After periods of heavy rain, it would alter and move its course by 2 or even 3 miles. And so the Horn of Plenty turned into a bone of contention. The plans for dynastic marriages and alliances came to naught, and diplomatic notes, tariff wars and trade embargoes began. The border conflicts grew stronger, and bloodshed seemed inevitable, then finally occurred, and continued to occur regularly. In his wanderings in search of work, Geralt usually avoided places beset by armed clashes, because it was difficult to find a job. Having experienced regular armies, mercenaries and marauders once or twice, the farmers became convinced that werewolves, striggers, trolls under bridges and barrow-wights were actually trifling problems and minor threats, and that, by and large, hiring a witcher was a waste of money, and that there were more urgent matters like, say, rebuilding a cottage burned down by the army, and buying new hens to replace the ones the soldiers had stolen and devoured. For these reasons, Geralt was unfamiliar with the lands of Emblonia, or Pontaria and Riverside, according to more recent maps. He didn't especially have any idea which of the places named on the signpost were closer, and where he ought to head from the crossroads in order to bid farewell to the wilderness as quickly as possible, and greet any kind of civilization again. Geralt decided on Findetan, which meant heading north, for more or less in that direction lay Novigrad, where he had to get to if he was to recover his swords, and by the 15th of July at that. After around an hour of brisk marching, he walked right into what he had so wanted to avoid. There was a thatched peasant homestead and several shacks close to the logging site. The fact that something was occurring there was being announced by the loud barking of a dog and the furious clucking of poultry, the screaming of a child and the crying of a woman, and swearing. He approached, cursing under his breath both his ill luck and his scruples. Feathers were flying, and an armed man was tying a fowl to his saddle. Another was thrashing a peasant cringing on the ground with a scourge. Another was struggling with a woman in torn clothing and the child hanging onto her. He walked up, and without thinking twice or speaking, seized the raised hand holding the scourge and twisted. The armed man howled. Geralt shoved him against the wall of a henhouse. He hauled the other one away from the woman by the collar and pushed him up against the fence. "Begone," he stated curtly. "This minute." He quickly drew his sword as a sign for them to treat him in accordance with the gravity of the situation, and remind them emphatically of the possible consequences of wrong-headed behaviour. One of the armed men laughed loudly. The other joined in, taking hold of his sword hilt. "Who are you, assaulting vagabond? Do you seek death?" "Begone," I said. The armed soldier tying on the fowl turned around from the horse, and was revealed to be a woman. A pretty one, in spite of her unpleasantly narrowed eyes. "Had enough of life?" It turned out the woman was able to contort her lips even more grotesquely. "Or perhaps you're retarded. Perhaps you can't count. I'll help you. There's only one of you. There are 3 of us, meaning you're outnumbered. Meaning you ought to turn around and sod off as fast as your legs can carry you, while you still have any." "Begone." I won't say it again. "Aha! 3 people are a piece of cake to you. And a dozen?" The sound of hooves thudding. The Witcher looked around. 9 armed riders. Pikes and bear spears were pointed at him. "You! Good for nothing. Drop your sword." He ignored the instruction and dodged towards the henhouse to have some protection at his back. "What's going on, Frigga?" "This settler is resisting," snorted the woman addressed as Frigga, "claiming that he won't pay the levy because he's already paid it, blah, blah, blah. So,
We decided to teach the off some sense, and then suddenly this grey-haired fellow sprang up from nowhere. A knight, it turns out. A noble man. A defender of the poor and oppressed. Just him alone, and he went for our throats.
So high-spirited,
chortled one of the horsemen, advancing on Geralt and aiming his pike at him.
Let's have him dance a jig. Drop your sword,
ordered a horseman in a plumed beret, who seemed to be the commander.
Sword on the ground.
Shall I spear him, Shevlov?
Leave him, Sperry.
Shevlov looked down on the Witcher from the saddle.
You won't drop your sword, eh?
He commented.
Are you such a hero? Such a hard man? You eat oysters in their shells, washed down with turpentine? Bow down before no one, and only stand up for the unjustly accused? Are you so sensitive to wrongs? We'll find out. Poker, Legenza, Flocket.
The 3 armed soldiers obeyed their leader at once, clearly having experience in that regard. They dismounted, their movements well drilled. One of them held a knife to the settler's throat, the other yanked the woman by the hair, and the third grabbed the child. The child began yelling.
Drop your sword, said Shevlov. This second, or... Legenza, slit the peasant's throat.
Geralt dropped his sword. They immediately leapt on him, pressing him against the planks and menacing him with their blades.
Aha! said Shevlov, dismounting. Success! You're in trouble, peasant champion, he added dryly. You've obstructed and sabotaged a royal detachment, and I have orders to arrest and put before the courts anyone guilty of that. Arrest? The man named Legenza scowled. Burden ourselves? Throw a noose around his neck and string him up, and that's that. Or cut him to pieces on the spot. I've seen this fella before, one of the riders suddenly said. He's a witcher. A what? A witcher. A wizard, making his living killing monsters for money. A wizard? Ugh! Kill him before he casts a spell on us. Shut up, Iskyric. Speak, Trent. Where did you see him, and in what circumstances? It was in Maribor, in the service of the Castellan there, who had hired him to kill some beast. I don't recall what, but I remember him for his white hair. Ah! So if he attacked us, somebody must have hired him to. Monsters are witches' work. They just defend people from monsters. Aha!
Frigga pushed back her lynx fur calpac.
I said so. A defender. He saw Legenza flogging the peasant, and Floquet making ready to ravish that woman. And categorized you correctly, Shevlov snorted, as monsters. So, you were lucky. I jest. Because the matter is simple, it seems to me. When serving in the army, I heard something quite different about witches. They hire themselves out for everything, to spy, to guard, even to assassinate. They called them the Cats. Trent saw this one here in Maribor, in Temeria, meaning he's a Temerian hireling, employed regarding the border posts. They warned me in Findertown about Temerian mercenaries and are promising a bounty for any caught. So, let's take him in fetters to Findertown, turn him into the commandant and claim the reward. Come on, tie him up. What are you waiting for? Are you afraid? He's not offering resistance. He knows what we'd do to the little peasants if he tries anything. And who's going to fucking touch him if he's a wizard? Knock on wood.
Legenza spat on the ground.
Lily-livered cowards,
yelled Frigga, untying the strap of her saddlebags.
Yellow bellies. I'll do it, since no one here has the balls.
Geralt allowed himself to be tied up. He decided to comply, for the time being. 2 ox wagons trundled out of the forest, wagons laden with posts and elements of some kind of wooden construction.
Someone go to the carpenters and the bailiff, Shevlov pointed. Send them back. We've sunk enough posts, it'll suffice for now. We shall take a rest here meanwhile. Search the farmyard for anything fit as fodder for the horses, and some victuals for us.
Legenza picked up and examined Geralt's sword, Dandelion's acquisition. Shevlov snatched it out of his hand. He hefted it, wielded it, and whirled it around.
You were lucky we came in force, he said. He would have carved you up no problem. You, Frigga and Flocket. Legends circulate about these witches' swords.
The best steel, oftentimes folded and forged again. And they're protected by special spells, thus achieving exceptional tensile strength and sharpness. A witcher edge, I tell you, pierces armour plate and mail like a linen shift, and cuts through every other blade like noodles. That cannot be, stated Sperry.
Like many of the others, his whiskers were dripping with the cream they had found in the cottage and guzzled.
Not like noodles.
I can't believe it either,
added Frigga.
Difficult to believe something like that,
threw in Poker.
Really?
Shevlov assumed a swordsman's pose.
Face me, one of you, and we find out.
Come on, who's willing?
Well? Why has it gone so quiet?
Very well. Ishgairak stepped forward and drew his sword.
I shall face you. What do I care? We shall see whether... On guard, Shevlov.
On guard. 1, 2, 3!
The swords struck each other with a clang. The metal whined mournfully as it snapped. Frigga ducked as a broken piece of blade whistled past her temple.
Fuck,
said Shevlov, staring disbelievingly at the blade, which had broken a few inches above the gilded crossguard.
Ain't not a notch on mine.
Ishgairak raised his sword.
Not a notch, not even a mark.
Frigga giggled like a schoolgirl. Legenza bleated like a billy goat. The rest guffawed.
Witcher sword, snorted Sperry. Cuts through like noodles. You're the fucking noodle. It's...
Shevlov pursed his lips.
It's sodding scrap. It's trash. And you...
He tossed away the remains of the sword, glowered at Geralt, and pointed an accusing finger at him.
You're a fraudster. An imposter and a fraudster. You feign to be a witcher and wield such trash. You carry junk like this instead of a decent blade. How many good people have you deceived, I wonder? How many paupers have you fleeced, swindler? Oh, you'll confess your peccadillos in Findertown. The Starosta will see to that.
He panted, spat, and stamped his foot.
To horse! Let's get out of here!
They rode away, laughing, singing, and whistling. The settler and his family gloomily watched them go. Geralt saw their lips moving. It wasn't difficult to guess what fate and what mishaps they were wishing on Shevlov and company. The settler couldn't have expected in his wildest dreams that his wishes would come true to the letter, and that it would happen so swiftly. They arrived at the crossroads. The highway leading westwards along the ravine was rutted by wheels and hooves. The carpenter's wagons had clearly gone that way, as did the company. Geralt walked behind Frigga's horse, tied to a rope attached to the pommel of her saddle. The horse of Shevlov, who was riding at the front, whinnied and reared up. Something suddenly flared on the side of the ravine, lit up, and became a milky, iridescent globe. Then the globe vanished, and a strange group appeared in its stead. There were several figures embraced and intertwined together.
What the devil?
Cursed Poker, and rode over to Shevlov, who was quietening down his horse.
What's going on?
The group separated into 4 figures. A slim, long-haired and slightly effeminate man, 2 long-armed giants with bow legs, and a hunched dwarf with a great double-limbed steel arbalest.
Draw your weapons, yelled Shevlov. Draw your weapons! Stand your ground!
First one, and then the other bowstring of the great arbalest clanged. Shevlov died at once from a bolt to the head. Poker looked down at his belly, through which a bolt had just passed, before he fell from his saddle.
Fight!
The company drew their swords as one.
Fight!
Geralt had no intention of standing idly by to wait for the result of the engagement. He formed his fingers in the Igni sign, and burned through the rope binding his arms. He caught Frigga by the belt and hurled her to the ground, and leapt into the saddle. There was a blinding flash, and the horses began to neigh, kick and thrash the air with their forehoofs. Several horsemen fell and screamed as they were trampled. Frigga's grey mare also bolted before the Witcher could bring her under control. Frigga leapt up, jumped and seized the bridle and reins. Geralt drove her away with a punch and spurred the mare into a gallop. Pressed to the steed's neck, he didn't see Degerlund, frightening the horses and blinding their riders with magical lightning bolts, or see Boo and Bang falling on the horsemen, roaring, one with a battle-axe, the other with a broad scimitar. He didn't see the splashes of blood, didn't hear the screams of the slaughtered. He didn't see Ishgairak die, and immediately after him Sperry, filleted like a fish by Bang. He didn't see Boo fell Flocket and his steed, and then drag him out from under the horse. But Flocket's stifled cry, the sound of a rooster being butchered, lingered long, until he turned from the highway and dashed into the forest.
Mahakam potato soup is prepared thus. Gather chanterelles in the summer and men on horseback in the autumn. If it is the winter or early spring, take a sizable handful of dried mushrooms. Put them in a pan and cover them with water. Soak them overnight, salt them in the morning, toss in half an onion and boil. Drain them, but do not discard the broth. Instead, be vigilant in removing the sand that has surely settled at the bottom of the pan. Boil the potatoes and dice them. Take some fatty bacon, chop and fry it. Cut the onion into half slices and fry them in the bacon fat until they almost stick. Take a great cauldron, toss everything into it, not forgetting the chopped mushrooms. Pour on the mushroom broth, add water as needs be, pour on sour rice starter to taste. How to execute the starter may be found elsewhere in another receipt. Boil and season with salt, pepper and marjoram according to taste and liking. Add melted fat back. Stirring in cream is a matter of taste, but heed, it is against our dwarven tradition, for it is a human fashion to add cream to potato soup.
Eleonora Rudorin Pigott.
Perfect Mahakam cuisine, the precise science of cooking and making dishes from meats, fishes and vegetables. Also, seasoning diverse sauces, baking cakes, making jam, preparing cooked meats, preserves, wines, spirits, and various useful cooking and preserving secrets, essential for every good and thrifty housewife.
Chapter 13. Like almost all post stations, this one was located at a junction where two roads intersected. It was a building with a shingle roof and a columned arcade with an adjoining stable and woodshed, set among white-barked birches. It was empty. There seemed to be no guests nor travellers. The exhausted grey mare stumbled, walking stiffly and unsteadily, her head hanging almost to the ground. Geralt led her and handed the reins over to the stable lad. He looked about 40 and was bent over under the burden of his years. He stroked the mare's neck and examined his hand. He looked Geralt up and down, then spat right between his feet. Geralt shook his head and sighed. It didn't surprise him. He knew he was at fault, that he'd overdone it with the gallop, and over difficult terrain, what's more. He'd wanted to get as far away as possible from Sorrel Dagerland and his minions. He was aware that it was a woeful justification. He also had a low opinion of people who drove their mounts into the ground. The stable lad went away, leading the mare and muttering to himself. It wasn't difficult to guess what he was muttering and what he thought. Geralt sighed, pushed the door open, and entered the station. It smelled agreeable inside, and the Witcher realized he hadn't eaten for more than a day. "There's no horse," said the postmaster, emerging from behind the counter and anticipating his question. "And the next mail coach won't be here for 2 days.
I could use some food."
Geralt looked upwards at the ridge and rafters of the high vault.
"I'll pay."
"We have none."
"Oh, come, postmaster," came a voice from the corner of the chamber. "Does it behove you to treat a traveller so?"
In the corner, seated at a table, was a dwarf. Flaxen-haired and flaxen-bearded, he was dressed in an embroidered patterned maroon jerkin, embellished with brass buttons on the front and sleeves. He had ruddy cheeks and a prominent nose. Geralt had occasionally seen unusually shaped, slightly pig potatoes at the market. The dwarf's nose was of an identical colour and shape.
"You offered me potato soup."
The dwarf glared sternly at the postmaster from under very bushy eyebrows.
"You surely won't contend that your wife only prepares one portion of it? I'll wager any sum that it also suffices for this gentleman. Be seated, traveller. Will you take a beer?" "With pleasure.
"Thank you," replied Geralt, sitting down and digging out a coin from the hiding-place in his belt.
"But allow me to treat you good, sir. Despite the misleading impression, I am neither a tramp nor a vagrant. I am a witcher. On the job, which is why my apparel is shabby and my appearance unkempt, which I beg you to forgive. 2 beers, postmaster.
The beers appeared on the table in no time. "My wife will serve the potato soup shortly," grunted the postmaster. "And don't look askance at what just happened. I have to have victuals ready the whole time, for were some magnet, royal messengers or post to arrive, and were I to run out and have nothing to serve them, yes, yes." Geralt raised his mug. He knew plenty of dwarves and knew their drinking customs, and proposed a toast.
"To the propitiousness of a good cause, and to the confusion of whoresons,"
added the dwarf, knocking his mug against Geralt's.
"It's pleasant to drink with someone who observes custom and etiquette. I'm Dario Bach. Actually, a Darian, but everyone calls me a Dario. Geralt of Rivia."
"The Witcher, Geralt of Rivia," declared Dario Bach, wiping the froth from his whiskers.
"Your name rings a bell. You're a well-travelled fellow, and it's no wonder you're familiar with customs. I, mark you, have come here on the mail coach, or the dilly, as they call it in the south, and I'm waiting for a transfer to the mail coach, plying between Dorian and Tretogor in Redania. Well, that potato soup is here at last. Let's see what it's like. You ought to know that our womenfolk in Mahakam make the best potato soup. You'll never eat its like. Made from a thick starter of black bread and rye flour, with mushrooms and well-fried onions."
The post-station potato soup was excellent, rich with chanterelles and fried onions, and if it was inferior to the Mahakam version made by dwarven women, then Geralt never found out in what respect, as Dario Bach ate briskly in silence and without commenting. The postmaster suddenly looked out of the window, and his reaction made Geralt do likewise. 2 horses had arrived outside the station, both looking even worse than Geralt's captured mount. And there were 3 horsemen. To be precise, 2 men and a woman. The Witcher looked around the chamber vigilantly. The door creaked. Frigga entered the station, and behind her, Legenza and Trent.
"If it's horses—"
The postmaster stopped abruptly when he saw the sword in Frigga's hand.
"You guessed,"
she finished his sentence.
"Horses are precisely what we need. 3. So move yourself. Bring them from the stable."
"You what—" The postmaster didn't finish that time either. Frigga leapt at him and flashed a blade before his eyes. Geralt stood up.
"Hey there."
All 3 of them turned towards him.
"It's you," drawled Frigga. "You, damned vagabond."
She had a bruise on her cheek where he'd punched her.
"All because of you," she rasped. "Shevlov, Polka, Sperry, all slaughtered. The entire squad. And you, whoreson, knocked me from the saddle, stole my horse and bolted like a coward, for which I shall now repay you."
She was short and slightly built. It didn't deceive the Witcher. He was aware, because he had experienced it, that in life, as at a post station, even very hideous things could be delivered in quite unspectacular packages.
"This is a post station," the postmaster yelled from behind the counter. "Under royal protection." "Did you hear that?" Geralt asked calmly. "A post station. Get you gone."
"You, oh great scallywag, are still feeble with your reckoning," Frigga hissed. "Do you need help counting again? There's 1 of you and 3 of us, meaning there are more of us."
"There are 3 of you."
He swept his gaze over them,
"and 1 of me. But there aren't more of you at all. It's something of a mathematical paradox, and an exception to the rule."
"Meaning?"
"Meaning, get the fuck out of here while you're still capable."
He spotted a gleam in her eye, and knew at once that she was one of those few who could strike in quite a different place than where they're looking. Frigga must only recently have begun perfecting that trick, for Geralt effortlessly dodged her treacherous blow. He outmaneuvered her with a short half-twist, kicked her left leg out from under her, and threw her onto the counter. She slammed against the wood with a loud thud. Legenza and Trent must have previously seen Frigga in action, because her failure left them simply dumbfounded. They froze, open-mouthed, for long enough to allow the Witcher to seize a broom he had spied earlier in the corner. First, Trent was hit in the face with the birch twigs, then across the head with a handle, and after that, Geralt put the broom in front of his legs, kicked him behind the knees, and tripped him up. Legenza calmed down, drew his sword, and leapt forward, slashing powerfully with a reverse blow. Geralt evaded it with a half-turn, spun right around, stuck out his elbow, and Legenza, his momentum carrying him forward, jabbed his windpipe into Geralt's elbow. He wheezed and fell to his knees. Before he fell, Geralt plucked the sword from his fingers and threw it vertically upwards. The sword plunged into a rafter and remained there. Frigga attacked low, and Geralt barely had time to dodge. He knocked her sword hand, caught her by the arm, spun her around, tripped her with the broom handle, and slammed her onto the counter again. Trent leapt for him, and Geralt struck him very fast in the face with the broom, once, twice, 3 times, then hit him with the handle on one temple, then on the other, and then very hard in the neck. The Witcher shoved the broom handle between his legs, stepped in close, seized Trent by the wrist, twisted it, took the sword from his hand and threw it upwards. The sword sank into a rafter and remained there. Trent stepped back, tripped over a bench and fell down. Geralt decided there was no need to harm him any further. Legenza got to his feet, but stood motionless, with arms hanging limp, staring upwards at the swords stuck high up in the rafters, out of reach. Frigga attacked. She whirled her blade, feinted, then made a short reverse stroke. The style was well suited to tavern brawls at close quarters and in poor lighting. The Witcher wasn't bothered by lighting, or the lack of it, and was only too familiar with the style. Frigga's blade cut through the air, and the feint wheeled her around so the Witcher ended up behind her back. She screamed as he put the broom handle under her arm and twisted her elbow. He yanked the sword from her fingers and shoved her away. "I thought I'd keep this one for myself," he said, examining the blade, "as compensation for the effort I've put in. But I've changed my mind. I won't carry a bandit's weapon." He threw the sword upwards. The blade plunged into the rafters and shuddered. Frigga, as pale as parchment, flashed her teeth behind twisted lips. She hunched over, snatching a knife from her boot. "That," he said, looking her straight in the eyes, "was a singularly foolish decision." Hooves thudded on the road. Horses snorted, weapons clanked. The courtyard outside the station suddenly teemed with riders. "If I were you, I'd sit down on a bench in the corner," Geralt addressed the 3 of them, "and pretend I wasn't here." The door slammed open. Spurs jangled, and soldiers in fox-fur hats and short black jerkins with silver braiding entered the chamber. Their leader was a man with a moustache and a scarlet sash. "Royal forces," he announced, resting his fist on a mace stuck into his belt. "Sergeant Kovac, 2nd Squadron of the 1st Company, the armed forces of graciously reigning King Foltest, the Lord of Temeria, Ponteria and Mahakam, in pursuit of a Redanian gang." Frigga, Trent and Legenza, on a bench in the corner, examined the tips of their boots. "The border was crossed by a lawless band of Redanian marauders, hired thugs and robbers," Kovac went on. "Those ne'er-do-wells are knocking over border posts, burning, pillaging, torturing and killing royal subjects. They would stand no chance in an engagement with the royal army, thus they are hiding in the forests, waiting for a chance to slip across the border. More such as them may appear in the locality. May you be warned that giving them help, information or any support will be construed as treason, and treason means the noose. Have any strangers been seen here at the station? Any newcomers? I mean suspicious individuals? And I say further that for identifying a marauder or helping in his capture there is a reward of 100 orins. Postmaster?" The postmaster shrugged, bowed his head, mumbled something, and began wiping the counter, leaning very low over it. The sergeant looked around and walked over to Geralt, spurs clanking. "Who are you?" "Ha! I believe I've seen you before, in Maribor. I recognize you by your white hair. You are a witcher, aren't you? A tracker and dispatcher of divers monsters? Am I right?" "You are? Then I have no quarrel with you, and your profession, I must say, is an honest one," pronounced the sergeant, simultaneously eyeing Adario Bach appraisingly. "Master Dwarf is also beyond suspicion, since no dwarves have been seen among the marauders. But for form's sake, I ask, what are you doing at the station?" "I came from Sedaris on a stagecoach, and await a transfer. Time is dragging, so the Honourable Witcher and I are sitting together, conversing and converting beer into urine." "A transfer, you say?" repeated the sergeant. "I understand. And you 2 men, who might you be?" "Yes, you. I'm talking to you." Trent opened his mouth, blinked and blurted something out. "What? Hey, get up! Who are you, I ask?" "Leave him, officer," Adario Bach said freely.
He's my servant, employed by me. He's a half-wit, an errant imbecile. It's a family affliction. By great fortune, his younger siblings are normal. Their mother finally understood she shouldn't drink from the puddles outside a plague house when pregnant.
Trent opened his mouth even wider, lowered his head, grunted and groaned. Ligenza also grunted and made a movement as though to stand up. The dwarf laid a hand on his shoulder.
Don't get up, lad, and keep quiet. Keep quiet. I know the theory of evolution. I know what creature humans evolved from. You don't have to keep reminding me. Let him off too, Commandant, sir. He's also my servant.
Yes. The sergeant continued to examine them suspiciously. Servants, is it? If you say so. And she, that young woman in male attire. Hey, get up, for I wish to look at you. Who be you? Answer when you're asked.
Ha ha, Commandant, sir, the dwarf laughed. She's a harlot. I mean a wife of loose morals. I hired her in Sidaris in order to bed her. You don't miss home if you journey with a supply of fanny. Any philosopher will certify to that.
He gave Frigga a firm slap on the backside. Frigga blanched in fury and ground her teeth. Indeed, the sergeant grimaced. How come I didn't notice at once? Why, it's obvious. A half-elf.
You've got half a prick, Frigga snapped. Half the size of what's considered normal. Quiet, quiet, Adario Bach soothed her. Don't take umbrage, Colonel. I simply landed an obstreperous whore.
A soldier rushed into the chamber and submitted a report. Sergeant Kovac stood up straight. The gang has been tracked down, he declared. We must give chase at all speed. Forgive the disturbance. At your service. He exited with the soldiers. A moment later, the thud of hooves reached them from the courtyard.
Forgive me that spectacle. Forgive my spontaneous words and coarse gestures, Adario Bach said to Frigga, Trent and Ligenza, after a moment's silence. In truth, I know you not. I care little for you, and rather don't like you. But I like scenes of hanging even less. The sight of hanged men kicking their feet depresses me deeply, which explains my dwarven frivolity.
You owe your lives to his dwarven frivolity, added Geralt. It would be polite to thank the dwarf. I saw you in action in the peasant homestead, and I know what kind of rogues you are. I wouldn't lift a finger in your defence. I wouldn't want or even know how to play such a scene as this noble dwarf did. And you'd already be hanging, all three of you. So be gone from here. I would advise the opposite direction to the one chosen by the sergeant and his cavalry. Not a chance. He cut them off on seeing their gaze directed towards the swords stuck into the rafters. You won't get them back. Without them, you'll be less inclined towards pillage and extortion. Be gone.
It was tense, sighed
Dario Bach, soon after the door closed on the three of them.
Damn it, my hands are still shaking a bit. Yours are not.
No. Geralt smiled at his recollections. In that respect, I am somewhat impaired.
Lucky for some.
The dwarf grinned.
Even their impairments are nice. Another beer?
No, thank you. Geralt shook his head. Time I was going. I've found myself in a situation, so to say, where haste is rather advisable, and it would be rather unwise to stay in one place too long.
I rather noticed, and won't ask questions. But you know what, Witcher? Somehow, the urge to stay at this station and wait idly for the coach for 2 days has left me. Firstly, because the boredom would do for me, and secondly, because that maiden you defeated with a broom in that duel said goodbye to me with a strange expression. Why, in the fervour I exaggerated a tiny bit. She probably isn't one of those you can get away with slapping on the bottom and calling a whore. She's liable to return, and I'd prefer not to be here when she does. Perhaps then we'll set off together?
Gladly. Geralt smiled again. It's not so lonely on a journey with a good companion. Any philosopher will certify to that. As long as the direction suits us both. I must to Novigrad. I must get there by the 15th of July. By the 15th without fail. He had to be in Novigrad by the 15th of July at the latest. He stressed that when the sorcerers were hiring him, buying 2 weeks of his time. No problem. Pinity and Zara had looked at him superciliously. No problem, Witcher. You'll be in Novigrad before you know it. We'll teleport you straight into the main street.
By the 15th, huh?
The dwarf ruffled up his beard.
Today is the 9th. There's not much time left, for it is a long road. But there's a way for you to get there on time.
He stood up, took a wide-brimmed pointed hat down from a peg and put it on. He slung a bag over his shoulder.
I'll explain the matter to you on the road. Let's be going, Geralt of Rivia, for this way suits me down to the ground.
They walked briskly, perhaps too briskly. Adario Bach turned out to be a typical dwarf. Although dwarves were, when in need or for reasons of comfort, capable of using every kind of vehicle or riding, pack or harness animal, they decidedly preferred walking. They were born walkers. A dwarf was able to cover a distance of 30 miles a day, as many as a man on horseback, and what's more, carrying luggage that a normal man couldn't even lift. A human was incapable of keeping up with an unburdened marching dwarf, and neither was the Witcher. Geralt had forgotten that, and after some time was forced to ask Adario to slow down a little. They walked along forest trails, and even at times across rough ground. Adario knew the way. He was very knowledgeable about the area. He explained that in Sedaris lived his family, which was so large that some kind of festivity was forever being held, be it a wedding, christening, funeral, or wake. In keeping with dwarven customs, failure to appear at such a gathering could only be excused with a death certificate, signed by a notary, and living family members could not get out of them. Thus, Adario knew the way to Sedaris and back perfectly. Our destination, he explained as he walked, is the settlement of Vieturna, which lies in the overflow area of the Pontar. There's a port in Vieturna where barks and boats often moor. With a bit of luck, we'll soon happen upon some specimen or other and embark. I must to Tritago, so I shall disembark in Crane Tussock, while you will sail further and be in Novigrad in some 3 or 4 days. Believe me, it's the quickest way.
I do. Slow down, Dario, please. I can barely keep up. Is your profession in some way connected to walking? Are you a hawker? I'm a miner, in a copper mine. Of course, every dwarf is a miner, and works in the mine in Mahakam. Stands at the coalface with a pick and mines coal. You're succumbing to stereotypes. Soon you'll be saying that every dwarf uses coarse language, and after a few stiff drinks attacks people with a battle axe. Wouldn't dream of it. My mine isn't in Mahakam, but in Coppertown near Tritago. I don't stand up or mine, but I play the horn in the colliery brass band. Interesting. Actually, something else is interesting here, laughed the dwarf. An amusing coincidence. One of our brass band's showpieces is called the March of the Witches. It goes like this. Ta-ra-ra-boom-boom, oompa, rim-sim-sim, pa-pa-ra-ta-ra-ra-ta-ra-ra-ta-ra-boom-boom-boom. How the hell did you come up with that name? Have you ever seen a Witcher marching? Where? When? In truth, Adario Bach became a little disconcerted. It's only a slightly reworked version of the Parade of the Strongmen, but all colliery brass bands play either the Parade of the Strongmen, the Entrance of the Athletes, or the March of the Old Comrades. We wanted to be original. Ta-ra-ra-boom-yay. Slow down, or I'll croak. It was totally deserted in the forests, and quite the opposite in the meadows and forest clearings they often happened upon. Work was in full swing there. Hay was being mowed, raked and formed into ricks and stooks. The dwarf greeted the mowers with cheerful shouts, and they responded in kind. Or didn't. That reminds me of another of our band's marches, Adario pointed at the toiling labourers. Entitled Haymaking. We often play it, especially in the summer season, and sing along to it, too. We have a poet at the pit. He composed some clever rhymes. You can even sing it a cappella. It goes like this. The men go forth to mow, the women they follow, they look up and they cower, they fear a dampening shower. We huddle to keep warm, and hide from the fierce storm, our shafts we proudly vaunt, and the tempest we taunt. And from the beginning, it's fine to march to, isn't it? Slow down, Adario. You can't slow down, it's a marching song, with a marching rhythm and metre. There were some remains of a wall showing white on a hillock, and the ruins of a building and a familiar-looking tower. Geralt recognized the temple from the tower. He couldn't remember which deity was linked to it, but he'd heard various stories about it. Priests had lived there long ago. Rumour had it that when their rapacity, riotous debauchery, and lasciviousness could no longer be tolerated,
The local residents chased them away and drove them into a dense forest, where, as rumour had it, they occupied themselves converting the forest spirits, apparently with miserable results.
"It's all Darem," pronounced Addario. "We're sticking to our route and making good time. We should arrive in Sylvan Dam by evening."
Upstream, the brook they were walking beside had bubbled over boulders and races, and once downstream spread out wide, forming a large pool. This was helped by a wood and earth dam that arrested the current. Some work was going on by the dam. A group of people were busily toiling there.
"We're in Sylvan Dam," said Addario. "The construction you can see down there is the dam itself. It's used for floating timber from the clearing. The river, as you heed, is not navigable, being too shallow. So the water level rises, the timber is gathered, and then the dam is opened. That causes a large wave, facilitating the rafting. The raw material for the production of charcoal is transported this way. Charcoal is indispensable for the smelting of iron."
Geralt finished his sentence.
"And smelting is the most important and most promising branch of industry. I know. That was clarified for me quite recently by a certain sorcerer, one familiar with charcoal and smelting." "No wonder he's familiar," snorted the dwarf. "The sorcerer's chapter is the major shareholder of the companies of the industrial complex at Gors-Valen, and it owns several foundries and metalworks outright. The sorcerers derive substantial profits from smelting, from other branches as well. Deservedly, too. After all, they largely created the technology. They might, however, give up their hypocrisy and admit that magic isn't charity, isn't altruistic philanthropy, but an industry calculated to make a profit. But why am I telling you this? You know yourself. Come with me. There's a small tavern over there. Let's rest, and we can doubtless get a bed there. For look, it's growing dark."
The small tavern was in no way worthy of the name, but neither could one be surprised. It served woodcutters and rafters from the dam, who didn't mind where they drank, as long as there was something to drink. A shack with a leaky thatched roof, an awning resting on poles, a few tables and benches made of rough planks, a stone fireplace. The local community didn't require or expect greater luxuries. What counted was what was behind the partition, the barrels from which the innkeeper poured beer, and from where he occasionally served sausage, which the innkeeper's wife, if she felt like it and was in the right mood, was willing to grill over the embers for a fee. Neither were Geralt and Addario's expectations excessive, particularly since the beer was fresh from a newly unbunged barrel, and not many compliments were needed for the innkeeper's wife to agree to fry and serve them a skillet of blood pudding and onion. After a whole day's wandering through forests, Geralt could compare the blood pudding to veal shank and vegetables, shoulder of boar, turbot in ink, and other masterpieces offered by the chef of the Natura Rerum Osteria, although, to tell the truth, he did miss the Osteria a little. "Do you by any chance know the fate of that prophet?" said Addario, gesturing the innkeeper's wife over and ordering another beer. Before they sat down to eat, they had examined a moss-grown boulder standing beside a mighty oak. Carved into its surface were letters informing that, in that precise place, on the day of the holiday of Birka in 1133 post-resurrectionem, the prophet Lebioda gave a sermon to his acolytes, and the obelisk honouring the event was financed and erected in 1200 by Spiridon Apps, a master braidmaker from Rinda, based in the minor marketplace. Goods of excellent quality, affordable prices, please visit. "Do you know the story of that Lebioda, whom some called a prophet?" asked Addario, scraping the rest of the blood pudding from the skillet. "I mean the real story." "I don't know any stories," replied the Witcher, running a piece of bread around the pan. "Neither real nor invented. I was never interested." "Then listen. The thing occurred over 100 years ago. I think not long after the date carved on that boulder. Today, as you well know, one almost never sees dragons, unless it's somewhere in the wild mountains in the Badlands. In those times they occurred more often and could be vexing. They learned that pastures full of cattle were great eating places, where they could stuff themselves without undue effort. Fortunately for the farmers, even a great reptile would limit itself to 1 or 2 feasts every quarter, but devoured enough to threaten the farm, particularly when it had it in for some region. One huge dragon became fixated on a certain village in Kaidwen. It would fly in, eat a few sheep, 2 or 3 cows, and then catch a few carp from the fish ponds for dessert. Finally, it would breathe fire, set alight a barn or hayrick, and then fly off. The dwarf sipped his beer and belched.
The villagers tried hard to frighten the dragon away using various traps and trickery, but all to no avail. As luck would have it, Lebioda had just arrived in nearby Banard with his acolytes. At that time, he was already celebrated, was called a prophet, and had masses of followers. The peasants asked him for help, and he astonishingly didn't decline. When the dragon arrived, Lebioda went to the pasture and began to exercise it. The dragon started by singeing him, as you would a duck, and then swallowed him, simply swallowed him, and flew off into the mountains. Is that the end? No, keep listening. The acolytes wept over the prophet, despaired, and then hired some hunters. Our boys, dwarven hunters, well versed in draconian matters. They stalked the dragon for a month, conventionally following the droppings the reptile was dumping, and the acolytes fell on their knees beside every turd and rummaged around in it, weeping bitterly, fishing out their master's remains. They finally put the whole thing together, or rather, what they considered to be the whole thing, but what was actually a collection of none-too-clean human, bovine, and ovine bones. Today it's all kept in the Novigrad temple in a sarcophagus, as a miraculous relic. Oh no, Dario, you made up that story, or greatly embellished it. Why the suspicion? Because I often keep company with a certain poet, and he, when he has to choose between the real version of an event and a more attractive one, always chooses the latter, which he moreover embroiders. Regarding that, he laughs off all accusations using sophistry, saying that if something isn't truthful, it doesn't mean at all that it's a lie. Let me guess who the poet is. It's Dandelion, of course, and a story has its own rules. A story is a largely false account of largely trivial events fed to us by historians who are largely idiots, smiled the Witcher. Let me also guess who the author of that quotation is, Dario Bach grinned. Visigotor of Corvo, philosopher and ethicist, and also a historian. However, regarding the prophet Lebioda, why, history, as it's been said before, is history. But I heard that in Novigrad the priests sometimes remove the prophet's remains from its sarcophagus and give them to the faithful to be kissed. If I were there, however, I'd refrain from kissing them. I shall too, promised Geralt. But as regards Novigrad, since we're on the subject, be at ease, interrupted the dwarf. You won't be late. We'll rise early and go at once to Vieturna. We'll find a good deal, and you'll be in Novigrad on time. Let's hope, thought the Witcher. Let's hope. People and animals belong to various species, while foxes live among people and animals. The quick and the dead wander along various roads, while foxes move between the quick and the dead. Deities and monsters march down various paths, while foxes walk between deities and monsters. The paths of the light and the darkness never join up or cross. Vulpine ghosts lurk between them. The immortal and demons tread their own ways. Vulpine ghosts are somewhere between. Ji Yun, a scholar from the times of the Qing dynasty. Chapter 14. A storm passed in the night. After sleeping in a hay barn, they set off at dawn on a chilly, though sunny morning. Keeping to the waymarked path, they passed through broad-leaved woodland, peat bogs and marshy meadows. After an hour of heavy marching, they reached some buildings. Vieturna, Dario Bach pointed. This is the harbour I was telling you about. They arrived at the river, where a brisk wind found them. They stepped onto a wooden jetty. The river formed a broad water there, as large as a lake, and the current was scarcely perceptible, as it was flowing some way off. The branches of willows, osiers, and alders on the bank hung down to the water. Waterfowl, emitting various sounds, were swimming all around. Mallards, garganets, pintails, divers, and grebes. A little ship was gliding gracefully over the water, merging into the landscape without frightening the whole feathered rabble. It had a single mast, with one large sail astern, and several triangular ones aft. Someone once rightly listed the 3 most beautiful sights in the world, said Dario Bach, staring at the spectacle. A ship in full sail, a galloping horse, and, a naked woman lying in bed. Dancing. A faint smile played around the Witcher's lips. A woman dancing, Dario. If you say so, the dwarf agreed. A naked woman dancing. And that little boat. Ah, you have to admit, looks lovely on the water. It's not a little boat. It's a little ship.
It's a cutter. A stout, middle-aged man in an elk-skin jerkin corrected him as he approached.
A cutter, gentlemen, which can easily be seen from the rig. A large mainsail, a jib, and 2 staysails on the forestays. Classic.
The little ship, or cutter, sailed close enough to the jetty for them to admire the figurehead on the prow. The carving depicted a bald old man with an aquiline nose, rather than the standard large-breasted woman, mermaid, dragon, or sea serpent.
Damn it, Audiobook grunted to himself. Does the prophet have it in for us, or what?
A 64-footer, went on the elderly gentleman in a proud voice, with a total sail area of 3,300 square feet. That, gentlemen, is the Prophet Lebioda, a modern Coviran-type cutter, built in the Novigradian shipyard and launched almost a year ago.
You're familiar with that craft, as we can see. Audiobook cleared his throat. You know plenty about her.
I know everything about her, since I'm the owner. Do you see the ensign at the stern? There's a glove on it. It's my company's emblem. If I may, I am Kevinar Van Vliet, a merchant in the glove-making trade.
Delighted to make your acquaintance.
The dwarf shook his right hand, eyeing up the merchant astutely.
And we congratulate you on the little ship, for it is well favoured and swift. It's a wonder that it's here in Viaturner on the broad water, away from the main Pontarian shipping lanes. It's also a wonder that the ship's on the water and you, its owner, are on the land, in the middle of nowhere. Is anything the matter?
Oh, no, nothing the matter, said the glove merchant, in Geralt's opinion, too quickly and too emphatically. We're taking on provisions here, nothing more. And in the middle of nowhere, oh, well, it's cruel necessity, rather than our wishes, has brought us here. For when you are hastening to rescue someone, you don't pay heed to the route you take. And our rescue mission—
Let's not go into details, Mr. Van Vliet, sir,
interrupted one of a group of characters, whose steps made the jetty suddenly tremble as they came closer.
I don't think that interests the gentleman, nor ought it to.
5 characters had stepped onto the jetty from the direction of the village. The one who had spoken, wearing a straw hat, was conspicuous by his well-defined jaw, with several days' stubble and large protruding chin. His chin had a cleft, owing to which it looked like a miniature arse. He was accompanied by a tall bruiser, a veritable giant, although from his face and expression he was by no means a moron. The third, stocky and weather-beaten, was every inch a sailor, down to the woolen cap and earring. The other 2, clearly deckhands, were lugging chests containing provisions.
I don't think, continued the one with the cleft chin, that these gentlemen, whoever they are, need know everything about us, what we're doing, or about our other private affairs. These gentlemen certainly understand that no one has the right to know our private business, in particular total strangers who we've come across by accident.
Perhaps not total strangers, interjected the giant. Master Dwarf, I know you not, indeed, but this gentleman's white hair betrays his identity. Geralt of Rivia, I believe. The Witcher? Am I not mistaken? I'm becoming popular, thought Geralt, folding his hands on his chest. Too popular. Should I dye my hair, perhaps, or shave it off like Harlan Zara? A Witcher? Kevinar Van Vliet was clearly delighted. A real Witcher? What a stroke of luck! Noble gentleman! Why, he's a veritable godsend. The famous Geralt of Rivia, repeated the giant. What a stroke of luck that we've met him now, in our situation. He'll help us get out of it. You talk too much, Cobbin, interrupted the one with the chin. Too fast and too much. What do you mean, Mr. Fish? Snorted the glove-maker. Can't you see what a turn-up this is? The help of someone like a Witcher. Mr. Van Vliet, leave it to me. I have more experience in dealings with such as this one here. A silence fell, in which the character with the cleft chin eyed the Witcher up and down. Geralt of Rivia, he finally said. Vanquisher of monsters and supernatural creatures. A legendary vanquisher, I would say. If I believed in the legends, that is. And where are your celebrated Witcher swords? I can't seem to see them. It's no wonder you can't see them, replied Geralt. Because they're invisible. What? Haven't you heard the legends about Witcher swords? The uninitiated can't see them. They appear when I utter a spell, when the need arises, if one arises.
because I'm capable of doing a lot of damage even without them. I'll take your word for it. I'm Javil Fish. I run a company in Novigrad offering various services. This is my partner, Petru Kobin, and this is Mr. Podlorak, captain of the Prophet Lebioda, and the Honourable Kevinar Van Vliet, whom you've already met, the owner of this little ship. I see, Witcher, that you're standing on a jetty in the only settlement within a radius of 20-odd miles, Javil Fish continued, looking around. In order to get out of here and find civilised roads, one must tramp through forests. It looks to me like you prefer to sail from this wilderness, embarking on something that floats on water. And the Prophet is sailing to Novigrad this very moment, and can take on passengers, like you and your companion dwarf. Does that suit you? Go on, Mr. Fish. I'm all ears. Our ship, as you see, isn't any old tub. You have to pay to sail on her, and a pretty penny. Don't interrupt. Would you be prepared to take us under the protection of your invisible swords? We can pay for your valuable Witcher services, meaning escorting us and protecting us during the voyage from here to the Novigradian port, as payment for the trip. What price, I wonder, do you put on your Witcher services? Geralt looked at him. Including the price of getting to the bottom of this. What? There are tricks and catches concealed in your proposition, Geralt said calmly. If I have to find them myself, I'll put a higher price on it. It'll be cheaper if you decide to be honest. Your mistrust arouses suspicion, Fish replied coldly, since swindlers forever sniff out deviousness. As it's said, a guilty conscience needs no accuser. We wish to hire you as an escort. It's rather a simple task, free of complications. What tricks could be hidden in it? This whole escorting business is a tall story, Geralt said, without lowering his gaze. Thought up on the spot and patently obvious. Is that what you think? It is. Because my lord the glove merchant let slip something about a rescue expedition, and you, Mr. Fish, are rudely silencing him. In no time, your associate will spill the beans about the situation you have to be extracted from. So, if I'm to cooperate, please leave out the fabrication. What kind of expedition is it, and to whose rescue is it hastening? Why so secretive? What trouble do you need to get out of? We shall explain it. Fish forestalled Van Vliet. We shall explain everything, my dear Witcher. But on board, croaked Captain Podlorak, who had been silent up to then. There's no point dallying any longer on this jetty. We have a favourable wind. Let's sail, gentlemen. Once it had the wind in its sails, the Prophet Lebioda sped swiftly across the widely spread waters of the bay, holding a course for the main channel, dodging between islets. The lines rattled, the boom groaned, and the ensign with a glove flapped briskly on the flagpole. Kevinar Van Vliet kept his promise. No sooner had the cutter pushed off from the jetty in Vierterna than he called Geralt and Addario to the bow and set about explaining. The expedition undertaken by us, he began, constantly glancing at a sullen Fish, is aimed at freeing a kidnapped child, Ximena de Sepulveda, the only daughter of Brianna de Sepulveda. That name rings a bell with you, no doubt. Fur tanneries, soaking and stitching workshops, and furrieries. Huge annual production, immense sums of money. If you ever see a lady in a gorgeous and expensive fur, it's sure to be from her factory. And it's her daughter that was abducted. For a ransom. Actually, no. You won't believe it, but a monster seized the little girl. A she-fox. I mean, a sheep-changer. A vixen. You're right, said the Witcher coldly. I won't. She-foxes or vixens, or more precisely, aguaras, only abduct elven children. That's right. That's absolutely right, snapped Fish, because although it's an unprecedented thing, the furriery in Novigrad is run by a non-human. The mother, Brian Dervalabmur, is a pure-blooded she-elf, the widow of Jacob de Sepulveda, whose entire estate she inherited. The family didn't manage to nullify the will or declare the mixed marriage invalid, even though it's against custom and divine law. Get to the point, interrupted Geralt. Get to the point, please. You claim that this Furrier, a pure-blooded she-elf, charged you with recovering her kidnapped daughter. You having us on? Fish scowled. Trying to catch us out? You know very well that if a she-fox kidnaps an elven child, they never try to recover it. They give up on it and forget it. They accept that it was fated to happen.
At first, Brianna de Sepulveda also pretended. Kevanar van Vliet butted in. She despaired, but, in the elven fashion, secretly. Outside, inscrutable, dry eyes. Va is de reiv ap ehen, va is eig verar, she repeated, which in their tongue comes out as, something ends, something begins. Indeed. But it's nothing but stupid elf talk. Nothing is ending. What is there to end? And why should it? Brianna has lived among humans for many years, observing our laws and customs, and is only a non-human by blood. In her heart, she's almost a human being. Elven beliefs and superstitions are powerful, I agree, and perhaps Brianna is just feigning her composure to other elves, but it's clear she secretly misses her daughter. She'd give anything to get her only daughter back, she-fox or no she-fox. Indeed, Lord Witcher, she asked for nothing. She didn't expect help. Despite that, we determined to help her, unable to look on her despair. The entire Merchants' Guild clubbed together and funded the expedition. I offered the profit and my own participation, as did the merchant Mr. Parlahi, whom you'll soon meet. But since we're businessmen and not thrill-seekers, we turned for help to the Honourable Javil Fish, known to us as a shrewd fellow and resourceful, unafraid of risk, adept in exacting matters, famous for his knowledge and experience.
The Honourable Fish, famous for his experience.
Geralt glanced at him.
Neglected to inform you that the rescue expedition is pointless and was doomed to failure from the start. I see two explanations. Firstly, the Honourable Fish has no idea what he's landing you in. Secondly, and more likely, the Honourable Fish has received a payment, sizable enough to lead you around the middle of nowhere in return, empty-handed.
You toss accusations around too eagerly. With a gesture, Kevanar van Vliet held back Fish, who was spoiling to give a furious rejoinder. You also too hastily predict a failure, while we merchants always think positively.
You deserve credit for such thinking, but in this case it won't help.
Why?
It's impossible to recover a child kidnapped by an Aguara, explained Geralt calmly. Absolutely impossible. And it's not even that the child won't be found, owing to the fact that the she-foxes lead extremely secretive lives. It's not even that the Aguara won't let you take the child away, and it's not an opponent to be trifled with in a fight, either in vulpine or human form. The point is that a kidnapped child ceases to be a child. Changes occur in little girls abducted by she-foxes. They metamorphosize and become she-foxes themselves. Aguaras don't reproduce. They maintain the species by abducting and transforming elven children. That vulpine species ought to perish.
Fish finally had the floor.
All those shape-changing abominations ought to perish. It's true that she-foxes seldom get in people's way. They only kidnap elven pups and only harm elves, which is good in itself, for the more harm is done to non-humans, the greater the benefits for real folk. But she-foxes are monsters, and monsters should be exterminated, destroyed, should be wiped out as a race. You live from that, after all, Witcher. You contribute to it. And I hope you won't bear us a grudge, either, that we're contributing to the extermination of monsters. But it seems to me these digressions are in vain. You wanted explanations, you've got them. You know now what you've been hired to do, and against what? Against what you have to defend us.
No offence, but your explanations are as foggy as urine from an infected bladder, Geralt commented calmly.
And the loftiness of your expedition's goal is as dubious as a maiden's virginity after a village fete. But that's your business. It's my job to advise you that the only way to defend yourself against an Aguara is to stay well away from it. Mr. Van Vliet.
Yes?
Return home. The expedition is senseless, so it's time to accept that and abandon it. That's as much as I can advise you as a witcher. The advice is free.
But you won't disembark, will you? Mumbled Van Vliet, paling somewhat. Lord Witcher? Will you stay with us? And were something to happen, will you protect us? Please agree, by the gods. Please say yes.
He'll agree. Don't worry, snorted Fish.
He'll sail with us. For who else will get him out of this wilderness? Don't panic, Mr. Van Vliet. There's nothing to fear. Like hell there isn't, yelled the glovemaker. That's a good one. You got us into this mess, and now you're playing the hero.
I want to sail to Novigrad safe and sound. Someone must protect us now that we're in difficulties. We're in danger of... We aren't in any danger. Don't fret like a woman. Go below decks like your companion Paulahy. Drink some rum with him, then your courage will soon return.
Gevenaar van Vliet blushed, then blanched, then met Geralt's eyes.
Enough fudging,
he said emphatically, but calmly.
Time to confess the truth.
Master Witcher, we already have that young vixen. She's in the afterpeak. Mr. Paulahy's guarding her. Geralt shook his head.
That's unbelievable. You snatched the Furrier's daughter from the Aguara. Little Ximena.
Fish spat over the side. Van Vliet scratched the back of his head.
It wasn't what we planned, he finally mumbled. A different one mistakenly fell into our hands. A she-fox, too, but a different one. And kidnapped by quite another vixen. Mr. Fish bought her from some soldiers who tricked the maid out of a she-fox. To begin with, we thought it was Ximena, just transformed. But Ximena was 7 years old and blonde. This one's almost 12 and dark-haired. We took her, even though she was the wrong one.
Fish forestalled the Witcher.
Why should elven spawn mature into an even worse monster? And in Novigrad, we might be able to sell her to a menagerie. After all, she's a curiosity, a savage, a half she-fox raised in the forest by a vixen. An animal park would surely shower us with coin.
The Witcher turned his back on him.
Captain, steer towards the bank. Not so fast, growled Fish. Hold your course, puddlerack. You don't give the commands here, Witcher. I appeal to your good sense, Mr. Van Vliet.
Geralt ignored him.
The girl shall be freed immediately and set down on the bank. Otherwise you're doomed. The Aguara won't abandon her child, and is already certainly following you. The only way to stop her is to give up the girl. Don't listen to him, said Fish. Don't let him frighten you. We're sailing on the river, on wide, deep water. What can some fox do to us? And we have a Witcher to protect us, added Petru Cobbin derisively, armed with invisible swords. The celebrated Geralt of Rivia won't take fright before any old she-fox. I don't know, myself, the glove-maker mumbled, his eyes sweeping from Fish to Geralt and Puddlerack. Master Geralt, I'll be generous with a reward in Novigrad. I'll repay you handsomely for your exertions, if you'll only protect us. I'll protect you by all means, in the only way possible. Captain, to the bank. Don't you dare! Fish blanched. Not a step towards the afterpeak, or you'll regret it. Cobbin!
Petru Cobbin tried to seize Geralt by the collar, but was unable to because Adario Bach, up to that moment calm and taciturn, entered the fray. The dwarf kicked Cobbin vigorously behind the knee. Cobbin lurched forward into a kneeling position. Adario Bach leapt on him, gave him a tremendous punch in the kidney, and then on the side of the head. The giant slumped onto the deck.
So what of he's a big un, said the dwarf, his gaze sweeping around the others. He just makes a louder bang when he hits the ground.
Fish's hand was hovering near his knife, but a glance from Adario Bach made him think better of it. Van Vliet stood open-mouthed, like Captain Podloruk and the rest of the crew. Petru Cobbin groaned and peeled his head from the deck.
Stay where you are, the dwarf advised him. I'm neither impressed by your corpulence nor the tattoo from Sturafors. I've done more damage to bigger fellows than you and inmates of harder prisons, so don't try getting up. Get out, do what's necessary. If you're in any doubt, he turned to the others, the Witcher and I are saving your lives this very moment. Captain, to the bank and lower a boat.
The Witcher descended the companionway, tugged open first one, then another door, and stopped dead. Behind him, Adario Bach swore. Fish also swore. Van Vliet groaned. The eyes of the skinny girl, sprawled limply on a bunk, were glazed. She was half naked, quite bare from the waist downwards, her legs spread obscenely. Her neck was twisted unnaturally, and even more obscenely.
Mr. Paulahy, Van Vliet stammered out. What have you done?
The bald individual sitting over the girl looked up at them. He moved his head as though he couldn't see them, as though he were searching for the origin of the glovemaker's voice.
Mr. Parley! She was screaming,
muttered the man, his double chin wobbling and his breath smelling of alcohol.
She started screaming. Mr. Parley, I meant to quiet her. Oh, only quiet her. But you killed her.
Fish stated a fact.
You've simply killed her.
Van Fleet held his head in his hands.
And what now?
Now, the dwarf told him bluntly, we're well and truly fucked.
There's no cause for alarm.
Fish punched the railing hard.
We're on the river, on the deep water. The banks are far away. Even if, which I doubt, the she-fox is following us, she can't endanger us on the water.
Master Witcher? Van Fleet timidly raised his eyes. What say you?
The Iguara is stalking us,
Geralt repeated patiently.
There is no doubt about that. If anything is doubtful, it's the expertise of Mr. Fish, whom I would ask to remain silent in relation to that.
Things are as follows, Mr. Van Fleet. Had we freed the young she-fox and left her on land, the Iguara might have let up on us. But what is done is done. And now only flight can save us. The miracle that the Iguara didn't attack you earlier shows indeed that fortune favours fools. But we may not tempt fate any longer. Hoist all the sails, Captain, as many as you have.
We can also raise the lower topsail,
Podlorek said slowly.
The wind's in our favour, and if—
Van Fleet cut him off. Master Witcher?
Will you defend us, sir?
I'll be straight, Mr. Van Fleet. Ideally, I'd leave you, along with Parley, the very thought of whom turns my stomach, and who's below deck getting plastered over the corpse of the child he killed.
I'd also be inclined to do that,
interjected Adario Bach, looking upwards.
For, to paraphrase the words of Mr. Fish about non-humans, the more harm happens to idiots, the greater the benefits to the judicious.
I'd leave Parley to the mercy of the Iguara, but the code forbids me. The Witcher Code doesn't permit me to act according to my own wishes. I cannot abandon anyone in peril of death.
Witcher nobility, snorted Fish, as though no one had ever heard of your villainy. But I support the idea of a swift escape. Unfurl all the canvas, Podlorek. Sail onto the shipping route and let's beat it.
The captain issued his orders, and the deckhands set about the rigging. Podlorek himself headed for the bow, and after a moment of consideration, Geralt and the dwarf joined him. Van Fleet, Fish, and Cobbin were quarrelling on the afterdeck.
Mr. Podlorek.
Yes?
Why is the ship so named? And that pretty unusual figurehead? Was it meant to persuade the priests to finance you?
The cutter was launched as menacing. The captain shrugged, with a figurehead that suited the name and pleased the eye. Then they were both changed. Some said it was all about sponsorship. Others, that the Novigradian priests were constantly accusing Van Vliet of heresy and blasphemy, so he wanted to carry favour with them. The prophet Lebioda's prow cut through the water.
Geralt?
What, Nazario?
That she-fox, I mean the Iguara. From what I've heard, she can change shape. She can appear as a woman, but may also assume the form of a fox, just like a werewolf.
Not exactly. Werewolves, werebears, were-rats, and similar creatures are therianthropes, humans able to shapeshift. The Guaria is an antherian, an animal, or rather a creature, able to assume the form of a human. And its powers? I've heard incredible stories. The Iguaria is said to be able to— I hope we'll get to Novigrad before the Iguara shows us what she's capable of. The Witcher interrupted. And if— it'll be better to avoid the if. The wind sprang up. The sails fluttered. The sky is growing darker, said Adario Bach, pointing, and I think I detected some distant thunder. The dwarf's hearing served him well. After barely a few moments it thundered again. This time they all heard it.
A squall's approaching, yelled Podlorek. On the deep water, it'll capsize us. We must flee, hide, protect ourselves from the wind. All hands to the sails, boys.
He shoved the steersman out of the way and took the helm himself. "Hold on! Hold on, every man!" The sky over starboard had turned a dark indigo. Suddenly a gale blew in, whipping the trees on the steep riverbank, tossing them around. The crowns of the larger trees swayed, the smaller ones bent over. A cloud of leaves and entire branches, even large boughs, were blown away. Lightning flashed blindingly, and almost at the same moment a piercing crack of thunder reverberated. Another crash followed it almost immediately, and a third. The next moment, presaged by a growing swooshing noise, the rain came lashing down. They could see nothing beyond the wall of water. The prophet Lebioda rocked and danced on the waves, rolling and pitching sharply every few seconds. On top of that, everything was creaking. It seemed to Geralt that each plank was groaning. Each plank was living its own life and moving, so it seemed, totally independently of the others. He feared that the cutter would simply disintegrate. The Witcher repeated to himself that it was impossible, that the ship had been constructed to sail even rougher waters, and that, after all, they were on a river, not an ocean. He repeated it to himself, spitting water and tightly clutching the rigging. It was difficult to tell how long it lasted. Finally, though, the rocking ceased, the wind stopped raging, and the heavy downpour churning up the water eased off, becoming rain, then drizzle. At that moment, they saw that Podlorak's manoeuvre had succeeded. The captain had managed to shelter the cutter behind a tall forested island where the gale didn't toss them around so much. The rain cloud seemed to be moving away, the squall dying down. Fog rose from the water. Water was dripping from Podlorak's drenched cap and running down his face. In spite of that, the captain didn't remove it. He probably never did. "Blood and thunder," he said, wiping the drops from his nose. "Where has it taken us? Is it a distributary or an old riverbed? The water is almost still. But a current's still carrying us." Fish spat into the water and watched the spittle flow past. He'd lost his straw hat. The gale must have blown it off. "The current is weak, but it's carrying us," he repeated. "We're in an inlet between some islands. Hold the course, Podlorak. It must finally take us to the deep water." "I reckon a waterway is to the north," said the captain, stooping over the compass. "So we ought to take the starboard branch. Not the port, but the starboard." "Where do you see branches?" asked Fish. "There's one river. Hold the course, I say." "A moment ago there was two," Podlorak insisted. "But maybe I had water in my eyes, or it was that fog. Very well. Let the current carry us. It's just that—" "What now?" "The compass. It's pointing completely—" No, it's all right. I couldn't see it clearly. Water was dripping onto the glass from my cap. We're sailing." "So, let's sail." The fog was growing denser and thinner by turns, and the wind had completely died down. It had grown very warm. "The water," Podlorak said. "Can you smell it? It has a different kind of smell. Where are we?" The fog lifted, and they saw dense undergrowth on the banks, which were strewn with rotten tree trunks. Instead of the pines, firs, and yews covering the islands, there were now bushy river birches and tall cypresses, bulbous at the base. The trunks of the cypresses were entwined around with climbing trumpet vines, whose garish red flowers were the only vibrant feature among the brownish-green swampy flora. The water was carpeted in duckweed, and was full of waterweed, which the prophet parted with its prow and dragged behind it like a train. The water was cloudy, and indeed gave off a hideous, somehow rank odour. Large bubbles rose up from the bottom. Podlorak was at the helm by himself again. "There may be shallows," he said, suddenly becoming anxious. "Hey there! Leadsman 4! They sailed on, borne by the weak current, never leaving the marshy landscape, or rotten stench. The deckhand at the prow yelled monotonously, calling out the depth. "Take a look at this, Master Witcher," said Podlorak, stooping over the compass and tapping the glass. What?" "I thought the glass was steamed up. But if the needle hasn't gone doolally, we're sailing eastwards, meaning we're going back where we came from." "But that's impossible.
We've been carried by the current. The river—"
He broke off. A huge tree, its roots partly exposed, hung over the water. A woman, in a long, clinging dress, was standing on one of the bare boughs. She was motionless, looking at them.
"The wheel," said the Witcher softly. "The wheel, Captain, towards that bank, away from the tree."
The woman vanished, and a large fox slunk along the bough, dashed away and hid in the thicket. The animal seemed to be black, and only the tip of its bushy tail white.
"She's found us."
Adario Bach had also seen her.
"The vixen has found us. Blood and thunder, be quiet, both of you. Don't spread panic."
They glided on, watched by pelicans from the dead trees on the banks. Interlude. 127 years later.
"That'll be a Varlo, miss, yonder, beyond the hillock,"
said the merchant, pointing with his whip.
"Of a furlong, no more. You'll be there in a trice. I head eastwards towards Maribor at the crossroads, so the time has come to part. Farewell. May the gods lead you and watch over you on your way."
"And over you, good sir," said Nimue, hopping down from the wagon, taking her bundle and the rest of her things, and then curtsying clumsily. "My sincere thanks for the ride on your wagon. Back there in the forest. My sincere thanks." She swallowed at the memory of the dark forest, deep into which the highway had led her for the last 2 days. At the memory of the huge, ghastly trees with their twisted boughs, entwined into a canopy above the deserted road. A road where she'd suddenly found herself all alone. At the memory of the horror that had seized her, and the memory of the desire to turn tail and fly. Home, abandoning the preposterous thought of journeying into the world alone, and banishing that preposterous thought from her memory.
"My goodness, don't thank me, it's a trifle," laughed the merchant. "Anyone would help a traveller. Farewell."
"Farewell. I wish you a safe journey." She stood for a moment at the crossroads, looking at a stone post, polished to a smooth slipperiness by the wind and rain. "It must have stood here for ages," she thought. "Who knows? Perhaps more than 100 years? Perhaps this post remembers the year of the comet. The army of the Northern Kings marching to Brenna, and the battle with Nilfgaard." As every day, she repeated the route she'd learned by heart, like a magical formula, like a spell. Virva, Guado, Sibel, Brugge, Casterfoot, Mortara, Ivalo, Dorian, Anker, Gorsvelen. The town of Ivalo made itself known from a distance, by its noise and foul smell. The forest ended at the crossroads. Further on, there was only a bare clearing, bristling with tree stumps, stretching out far away towards the horizon and the first buildings. Smoke was trailing everywhere. Rows of iron vats, retorts for making charcoal, were smoking. There was a smell of resin. The nearer the town, the louder grew the noise. A strange metallic clank, making the ground shudder perceptibly beneath her feet. Nimue entered the town and gasped in amazement. The source of the noise and the shuddering of the ground was the most bizarre machine she had ever seen. A huge, bulbous copper cauldron with an enormous wheel, whose revolutions drove a piston shining with grease. The machine hissed, smoked, spluttered boiling water, and belched steam. Then, at a certain moment, uttered a whistle so horrifying and dreadful that Nimue was dumbfounded. But she quickly overcame her fear, even approaching closer and curiously examining the belts which the gears of the hellish machine used to drive the saws in the mill, cutting trunks at incredible speed. She would have continued watching, but her ears began to hurt from the rumbling and grinding of the saws. She crossed a bridge. The small river below was murky and stank repugnantly, bearing wood chips, bark, and flecks of foam. The town of Ivalo, however, which she had just entered, reeked like one great latrine. A latrine where, to make matters worse, somebody had insisted on roasting bad meat. Nimue, who'd spent the previous week among meadows and forests, began to choke. The town of Ivalo which marked the end of another stage on her route, had seemed like a resting place to her. Now she knew she wouldn't tarry any longer than was absolutely necessary, nor add Ivalo to her store of pleasant recollections. As usual, she sold a punnet of mushrooms and medicinal roots at the market. It didn't take long. She was now practised, knowing what there was demand for, and whom she should go to with her wares. She pretended to be half-witted, owing to which she had no problem selling, the stallholders vying with each other to outwit the dull girl. She earned little, but didn't waste time, for speed mattered. The only source of clean water in the vicinity was a well in a narrow little square, and in order to fill her canteen, Nimue had to wait her turn in a lengthy queue. Acquiring provisions for the next stage of her journey went more smoothly. Enticed by the smell, she also bought several stuffed pasties, which, on closer inspection, seemed suspicious. She sat down by a dairy to eat them, while they were still tolerably fit to be consumed without seriously damaging her health, for it didn't look as though they would continue in that state for long. Opposite was a tavern called the Green Something. The sign's missing lower plank had turned the name into a riddle and intellectual challenge. A moment later, Nimue became engrossed by her attempts to guess what, apart from frogs and lettuce, could be green. She was startled out of her reverie by a loud discussion being conducted on the tavern steps by a small group of regulars.
"The Prophet Lebioda, I tell you," ranted one of them. "The legendary brig! That ghost ship that vanished without trace more than 100 years back with all hands, and would later appear on the river when misfortune was in the air, manned by a ghostly crew. Many saw it. People said it would continue to appear as a spectre until the wreck was found. Well, and they finally found it." "Where?" "In Rivermouth, on an old riverbed in the mud, in the very heart of a bog what they was drying out. It was all overgrown with weed and moss. After they'd scraped off the weed and moss, they found the inscription, the Prophet Lebioda." "And treasure? Did they find any treasure? There was meant to be treasure there, in the hold. Did they find any?" "No one knows. The priests, they say, confiscated the wreck, calling it a holy relic." "That? What nonsense!" hiccuped another regular. "Believing in them childish tales. They found some old tub, and then at once, ghosts, ship, treasure relics. I tell you all, that's bullshit, trashy writing, foolish rumours, old wives' tales. I say, you there, wench, who be you? Who's a you?"
"My own." Nimue had a ready answer by then.
"Brush your hair aside, and show us your ear, for you look like elven spawn, and we don't want elven half-breeds here."
"Let me be, for I don't incommode you, and I'll soon be setting off."
"Ah, and whither do you go?"
"To Dorian." Nimue had also learned to also give as her destination only the next stage, in order never, ever to reveal the final objective of her trek, because that only caused great merriment.
"Ho ho! You've a long road ahead of you."
"Hence I am about to go. And I'll just tell you, noble gentlemen, that the Prophet Lebioda wasn't carrying any treasure. The legend doesn't say anything about that. The ship vanished and became a ghost because she was cursed, and her skipper hadn't acted on good advice. The witcher who was there advised them to turn the ship around, not to venture into an offshoot of the river until he'd removed the curse." "I read about that."
"Still wet behind the ears and such a clever clogs," pronounced the first regular. "You should be sweeping floors, wench, minding pots and laundering smalls. Simple as that. Says she can read. Whatever next." "A witcher?" snorted a third. "Tall tales. No but tall tales." "If you're such a know-it-all, you must have heard of our Magpie Forest," interjected another. "What? You haven't? Then we'll tell you. Something evil lurks there. But it awakes every few years, and then woe betide anyone who wanders through the forest. And your route, if you're truly headed for Dorian, passes right through Magpie Forest."
"And do any trees still stand there? For you've cut down everything. Nothing but bare clearings remain."
"Just look what a know-it-all she is, a mouthy stripling. What's a forest for if not to be cut down, eh? What we felled, we felled. What remains, remains. But the woodcutters fear to enter Magpie Forest, such a horror is there. You'll see for yourself, if you get that far. You'll piss in your pants from fear."
"I'd better be off then."
Virva, Guado, Sibel, Brugge, Casterford, Mortara, Ivalo, Dorian, Anchor, Gorsfellen. I'm Nimue Vegvladir ap Gwyn. I'm headed for Gorsfellen, to Aretusa, to the school of sorceresses on the Isle of Thaneth.